Meeting of July 30th, Plan Commission meeting to order. We do have some words from our technical facilitator.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate the video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I have a few comments I want to make. First, I want to remind everybody that we will not be taking any formal actions tonight. This is really a time for discussion, questions, and then having general direction to staff about what we would like to see happen. And it may be that it would be simply some additional research. It might be doing an initial draft of an ordinance, but we will not be taking any formal action tonight. I want to welcome you all and thank Plan Commissioners for being here, of course, as well as we've got a lot of different staff members here. So if there are particular questions that we are looking to have answered, we've got a lot of resources here today. We are going to try to stick pretty closely to our timeline so we can complete the meeting by 8 o'clock. We've had a lot of meetings and a lot of long meetings, so that is our goal. With that, we do have registrants, and I will remind the registrants 3 minutes, and we do stick pretty closely to the 3 minutes. So the first registrant is Kathryn Pensack, 207 North Dickinson, Madison, neither support nor opposed, wishing to speak. Kathryn.
Hello, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Commission for your time and for this chance to speak to you. I think this is an important meeting. And my comment is simple. I'd just like to remind you that 70% of the CO2 produced in cities comes from the built environment. And since we're in a global climate crisis, this is a very important aspect that comes through the committee's hands, because you deal with so many projects that have buildings and apartments and houses in them. I strongly urge the Commission to do all in its power to make the buildings you approve produce less CO2. Now, at your last meeting, I noticed that you had about 115 dwelling units that came through the Commission, and they're going to use an awful lot of energy over their lifespan. So we really need to pressure the developers to be more sustainable. We need more solar, less car traffic, for example, as well as better building design. I'd also like to just state that according to solarenergy.org, it only costs $2 to $3 per watt this month to put solar panels up. And as you have a larger project, it's even cheaper. So I do have one question too. I'm wondering if the Commission currently requires projects that come before you to file any environmental sustainability reports or plans, and how that works. How important are these to you, and do you really follow them up, or do you even have something like this? So
we won't be addressing individuals' questions right now, but okay. Thank you for raising that as an issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Pensack. The next registrant is David Hoffert, 2006 Monroe Street, Madison, Wisconsin. Support wishing to speak, to be followed by Bill Connors. Mr. Hoffert.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good evening. My name is David Hoffert. I'm a former president of two Madison neighborhood associations and a former candidate for Madison Common Council. During my campaign for Common Council, I made housing and zoning reform my centerpiece issue. First of all, I want to commend you for having this discussion tonight. Madison desperately and urgently needs more housing, and especially affordable housing, and reforms like you are considering tonight will likely be necessary to meet those needs. At the same time, I want to caution you against simply adopting a mentality of less regulation will mean more housing. It likely will mean that, but it will also mean less housing that aligns with our community's values. If we went to the extreme of simply lifting most or all zoning regulations, I'm confident that three things would happen. More housing would be built in Madison, less of it would be affordable housing, and the affordable housing that would be built would already be in low-income areas of the city. I want to specifically call your attention to that third point because it's one that we don't talk about much. Madison's racial equity failings are, of course, as complex as they are severe, but few would argue that our city's intense segregation isn't a significant part of the problem. If we simply let developers build what they want where they want, they will naturally target low-income neighborhoods for affordable housing because land is cheaper there, tax credits are easier to get there, and so on. As a result, this affordable housing would further entrench an already severe segregation. We should aim higher. I'm no expert on the zoning code, but I can imagine the creation of a new zoning district, something like multifamily affordable housing, that would allow for a streamlined approval process for affordable housing, but a more status quo process for non-affordable housing. These districts could then be placed in areas that we actively seek to build affordable housing, along transit corridors, of course, but also in wealthier and wider parts of the city. In this way, we could use market incentives, but no actual mandates or prohibitions vis-a-vis state law, to make affordable housing a tool for desegregation in our city, and use these policies to address not only the housing crisis, but other crises that Madison faces at the same time. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. I see that Commissioner Sundquist has his hand raised. Commissioner Sundquist, did you have a question or a point that you?
Yeah, it's I have a participant who had registered and is trying to get on, and it just contacted me. He's getting prompted to put in a password, so I don't know what to tell him.
Jesse?
Yeah, should not have a password. That shouldn't be an issue. Can you forward that information to me?
I just got a text. He may have fixed it, but if I have to forward it to you, how will I do that?
I'll send you something. Just
okay.
Hold on.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. Okay, the next registrant is Bill Connors, 25 West Main Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing Smart Growth Greater Madison, to be followed by Robert Proctor. Mr. Connors?
Mr. Connors is not here.
Okay. Then our next registrant is Robert Proctor, 2 East Mifflin Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing the Realtors Association of South Central Wisconsin, to be followed by Matt Frater. Mr. Proctor?
Mr. Proctor is not here either.
Okay. Matt Frater, 2906 Stevens Street. Oh, he does not wish to speak, but we do have some other ones that do wish to speak. Hold on. Deanne Shaughnessy, 115 Langdon Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Ms. Shaughnessy?
That one was actually done incorrectly. It looks like she registered for the wrong meeting. That was item 20 on Langdon from last meeting.
Okay. Then the next registrant is Michael Basford, 1917 Schlingen Avenue, Madison, neither support nor opposed, and wishing to speak, to be followed by Bob Stone. Mr. Basford.
Looks like he had an outdated Zoom, so I had to promote him to panelist.
Mr. Basford, you're on.
Hello. Thank you very much for, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for your time this evening. My name is Michael Basford. I live at 1917 Schlingen Avenue in Madison. I am representing myself, but for informational purposes, just to let you know that I currently serve as the director for the state of Wisconsin's Interagency Council on Homelessness. And as some of you may remember, I served on the Plan Commission from 2007 to 2011. And during that time, I also served on the Zoning Code Rewrite Committee. Many times while I served on the Plan Commission, I would bring up effects projects that we approved would have on housing affordability in Madison. And 10 plus years ago, we were operating with an affordable housing crisis, and today that crisis has worsened. Studies show we need to develop thousands of affordable units in Madison to meet the needs of our workforce, and especially households that have incomes that are 50% or less than the county's median income. The largest barrier we have in this community for moving people from homelessness into housing is the availability of affordable units, and I am grateful that you'll be discussing affordable housing this evening. I trust that as you have your discussion this evening and make policy decisions in the future, that you will strike a balance between increasing opportunities for developments and increased density and provide more housing units, and giving away the store in terms of trimming necessary regulations for development. And finally, while you're at this, I want to make a pitch to you to consider changing the zoning code to allow for more opportunities for the siting and development of cooperative housing. In the current zoning code, housing cooperatives are allowed in only 7 out of 15 residential zones. And housing cooperatives are a benefit that should be allowed in more areas of the city. They provide affordability and, in many cases, opportunities for co-op members to educate themselves in all aspects of household management and housing life skills. And to this, I speak of personal experience. Early in my life, I spent 8 years living in a housing co-op while working in the service industry. And the availability of cooperative housing allowed me to affordably live within walking distance of the restaurant I worked at. And so I hope you take the opportunity to review the zoning code as it relates to housing cooperatives. And with that, thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Basford. The next registrant is Bob Stone, 1101 Colby Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak, to be followed by Joshua Napra. Mr. Stone.
Mr. Stone isn't here, but Mr. Napra is.
Okay. His address is 656 Crandall, Madison, neither supporting nor opposing and wishing to speak. Mr. Napra.
Yeah, hello, this is Josh. So I'm glad the Plan Commission is here to talk about increasing the amount of housing, and especially affordable housing in Madison. I've listened to many city planners, housing advocates, and elected officials discuss tens of thousands of people who will be moving to Madison next decade. I've then heard these same elected officials state that a building should be shorter to decrease the amount of shadows cast, thus reducing the number of units. I've heard these elected officials demand more parking spaces, again reducing the number of units. They've rejected buildings because they don't want to demolish a dilapidated building that can technically be interpreted as history. I've also heard developers say that affordable housing needs to increase in the city, then asked how many affordable units will be in their building. They respond, well, these are luxury condos. Everyone here is guilty of making excuses as to why affordable housing cannot be built. Everyone is in favor of affordable housing until a specific proposal comes within their district. In their proposal to the city, developers are asking for less neighborhood input in order to speed up the development process. In my experience, developers contact the alder 30 days before submitting a proposal, leaving no time for neighborhood input until the first city meeting. This way, city resources of the discussion between neighborhoods and the developer is now taking place in a series of 3-minute testimonies of discussion. They also ask developers, is the city process the reason you charge $1,400 for a 1-bedroom apartment? And would removing neighborhood input drop that cost to $882 a month, which is what the city estimates someone making 60% of the AMI should pay for rent? Alders are guilty of rejecting or delaying development. Let's take a look at the July 13th Plan Commission meeting as an example of how development proposals are handled. The agenda featured 2 separate proposals to demolish older buildings in favor of a larger mixed-use development. Ultimately, both proposals were placed on file without prejudice due to concerns from alders in this room. If I were to propose a solution, I would say that developers should commit to actually including affordable units in new development and not overpropose, knowing that they have scaled back for their package. The city shouldn't hide behind their processes and public comment when they don't want to make hard decisions. And neighborhoods should do some soul searching on which aspects of development make their neighborhoods more affordable and diverse, which is a goal we should collectively support. This is all to say that I am in support of most of what is on the table today, opening up zoning to solve for the missing middle, supporting ADUs and helping people build, finance, and rent them, holding developers accountable to adding affordable units, understanding that new units require demolition and we shouldn't preserve history over people. I'm also supportive of streamlining the city process as long as that does not lead to shutting out public input. As a neighborhood representative, I'm extremely willing to speak to my neighbors and developers about challenging the status quo and ensuring that more people can live in our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Napra. Our next registrant is Neil Hansen, 222 Acewood Boulevard, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Mr. Hansen.
Mr. Hansen is not here, but we do now have Bill Connors, if you'd like to go back to him.
Yes, let's go back to Mr. Connors. Mr. Connors?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize for not being on when I was called earlier, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you. I commend the effort that you're starting on this evening. I think this is an important endeavor, and hopefully one that will bear fruit and encourage more housing development throughout the city of Madison to help close the gap between supply and demand. I have just one request to make this evening, and that is if at the end of this meeting, the Plan Commission gives direction to staff that we want you to come back and draft an ordinance that has this in it and this in it and that in it, but not this other thing, that you also strongly recommend to staff, city staff, that they not produce that draft in isolation, that they engage in a collaborative process with stakeholders in the drafting process, so that you get a product that actually gives you the best chance of producing more housing, quality housing, affordable housing in the city of Madison. Rather than have a process where the staff isolates themselves, does all the drafting, and then puts it out for public comment, because at that point it's really very difficult to have meaningful input. So that's my request of the Plan Commission this evening, is if you would give that additional request to the staff, that when they're working on drafting, to involve stakeholders in the drafting process. I'm convinced and confident and believe you will find too that we will produce a better product that will more likely produce the result that you're seeking to produce. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We do have some registrants not wishing to speak but available to answer questions. First one is Matt Frater, 2906 Stevens Street, Madison, support, not wishing to speak but available to answer questions. Elias Zavarsky, 615 North Henry Street, Madison, support, not wishing to speak. Jack Kerr, 1045 East Wilson Street, in support, not wishing to speak. Ashley Coffrin, 1614 Rivers Point Court, from Minnesota, opposed and not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And finally, Claire Warsick, 412 North Carroll Street, Madison, opposed, not wishing to speak. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Seeing no hands raised, we will move on then. The next item on our list of things to do is a staff introduction to housing needs by Matt Wachter. Mr. Wachter. And if you could raise your hand, then I could unmute. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
I apologize if I have any technical difficulties. I'm at a vacation house in Door County right now with not great internet, so I apologize in advance. So I'm Matt Wachter. I am the...
Matt, can I interrupt you for just a minute? Alder Rummel just raised her hand, and I want to make sure that there's nothing that we need to take care of before you get in.
Sure.
To your comments. Alder Rummel, did you have something you need to say?
Thanks, Chair Sellers. I just wanted you to recognize that we have members of the Housing Strategy Committee with us today.
Oh, okay.
I served on that committee. I am recognizing several of them because they've given such long service. So if maybe they could show their faces so the public can also know that these are policymakers have helped us so much over the last many years. So
okay.
Show you off. So thank you.
So yes, thank you, Alder Rummel, and thank you to Housing Strategy committee members for joining us. We do have a few alders here too, so I would like to thank them for being here and listening in. So thanks, Alder Rummel, and then we will go back to Mr. Wachter.
Great. Matt Wachter, I'm the Director of Planning, Community, and Economic Development for the City of Madison, as well as the Executive Director of the city's Community Development Authority. So before this, I was staff in housing and real estate, and then I was staff for the city's Housing Strategy Committee for 6 years up until very recently. So a lot of what's in front of you tonight is really work that has come out of housing reports from that committee, where it's come out of our community development division related to housing and racial inequity, and then the city's comprehensive plan. So between the 20 odd reports that staff have written over the last 6 or 7 years, these things that are in front of you really sort of came through consistently as policies to move forward. So I have a little bit of data. So I don't know, can I get the ability to share screen?
I will look to our tech facilitators for that.
Yep, I just changed the settings. You should be able to do it now.
Great. All right. Right, see that now?
Okay.
All right. So I'm a data person. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of data here to sort of tell the story. So the city of Madison has incredibly durable population growth. We grow at roughly 1% per year every single year. And what that means is that we always have to be building housing to keep up with this sort of strong, consistent demand that we have. And if we sort of look forward at projections, that means that, in the next 20-ish years, we're going to be adding about 70,000 people to the city of Madison if we keep at our current growth rate. And so it's roughly, call it, 3,000-ish people per year. And when we translate that into housing, over the last decade, about 9 out of 10 households that we've added have been renters. So even if some of that trend holds, that means we need to be adding, we're going to call it about 1,500 new rental units per year just to keep up with our growth in the city. And if you look at this graph, we used to add roughly that many multifamily units before the recession, and the recession hit, and the city really, we stopped building for a number of years, but we kept on adding people. And so we kept growing right on through the recession. And only in the last few years, we've added as many rental units as we've added renters to the city. And so what happens when you don't add enough units, vacancy rate drops pretty dramatically. So in the United States, we consider 5% vacancy to be a healthy vacancy rate. And as you can see, in those years after the recession, our vacancy rate dropped so that we had one of the lowest vacancies in the country. And it's only, even though we've added thousands and thousands of units in these last years, it's barely moved our vacancy rate up to 3%. So we have a very imbalanced rental market. And when vacancy rates get this low, a couple of things happen. The number one thing is it really shifts a lot of power from the renter to the landlord. So because there's a lot of people who want to be in those units, landlords can be very picky on who they rent to. And that means that, people with lower incomes, with shakier rental histories, they're squeezed out of our rental market. And what this tells us, we need to be adding at least as many units, really more units that we've been adding to get back to the point of a healthy rental market. And it just, we haven't been able to do it. We haven't been able to add as many units as we need. It means we have a pretty significant rental housing shortage in the city across the board. And the other thing that happens when vacancy rates are really low and landlords have more power in this relationship is they can charge more. And we saw rents go up pretty dramatically, after the recession. And that's, again, because for existing units, there's more competition for them. But it also means that the development market, when they're adding units, they're tending to add towards the higher end to people who are really able to pay those rents. And again, that means our average rental rate and price is going up. And in the city of Madison, what this all translates into is only about half of our rental households can technically afford their rent, which means they're paying 30% of less in their household income to rent. Another quarter of our renters pay 30 to 50% of their household income in rent. And the last quarter of our renters pay more than half of their income to rent. And that is not a place that is sustainable to be. So housing shortage, again, sort of translates into these higher prices, and a lot of people in our city cannot afford to rent here. And so that's sort of the big picture. We sort of look at specific populations, overall for white households, incomes are high enough that they still have a fair amount of housing choice across the city. But when we look at our populations of color, particularly Black households, because of overall Black households on average have lower income, they have a lot less housing choice in the city. And so there's only a handful of places where the average income Black household can afford the average rent. And I could throw another, half a dozen maps up here and charts and graphs that get at the point that beyond the fact that we have a housing shortage, we have a real issue of that we need more housing types at more price points sort of across the city in more places, because people, especially people with lower incomes, don't have a lot of choices as to where they live. And so again, a lot of the items in front of you tonight are getting at either the broad issue of a shortage of rental housing or the issues of not enough housing choice across price points and across places in the city. So try to keep this really brief. So I will turn off my sharing. And I am here available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wachter. Are there any questions specific to Matt Wachter? We're going to be getting some additional information, but I don't think Mr. Wachter is going to be staying with us the whole evening. So are there any questions specifically for Mr. Wachter? Alder Rummel.
Thanks for being here, Matt. And because you brought it up, I'm going to bring it up. So not on our list of things to discuss is the power of the Community Development Authority to build more housing. And I think this is a topic that we haven't really dealt with for over a decade. I think there was previous staff that, it was a different time and they worked more on building more housing and on the southwest side, and I know your staffing has been, struggling and all. I mean, there's reasons, but I think it's something as policymakers, you have a lot of power in the CDA that we're not using to build housing. So I just want to put that on the table. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder.
Sure. Just on that, so the city has hired a new housing development person who will help the CDA, and they start on Monday of next week. So staffing issues being solved. And then number two, the CDA is planning to do strategic planning in August and September to get at some of these issues of how much emphasis should be on rehabilitating our CDA housing stock, which was mostly built in the 60s and 70s, versus how much emphasis should we put on adding new units. So we will definitely take your message back to our strategic planning over the next couple of months.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Wachter? I see that an individual who's not a member of the Plan Commission is wanting the floor. Ms. Logan, I assume that you're with the Housing Strategy?
Yes, I'm with the Housing Strategy Committee. Matt, on your map where you showed the availability of rental properties above and below the 50% marks, is it possible to find companion maps maybe at a third or at 25%? I'm not sure what data you were able to access to generate that map, and I'd be curious to see how the map would align if we were looking at availability of rental properties for a third of the Black population or 25%.
Thank you.
Excuse me, 25% of the housing, a third of the housing.
Thank you,
You know
Ms.
what I mean?
Logan. If we could put that in as a data request related to this,
that would be great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner, you're still muted. I think you need to unmute from your end. Okay, I don't know what the problem is. Can you try again? I've tried unmuting it from this end. Tech Facilitator, can you help us out here? Tech Facilitator?
You should have a prompt on his screen. We all clicked it at some point.
It looks like he does, and he's clicking and it's not working. Yeah, we are not hearing you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I would say just back out and then return with the link that you came in. And
okay, so sign out and then sign back in, and let's see if that works. Sorry. Okay, seeing no other raised hands for Mr. Wachter, thank you very much for, unless Commissioner Cantrell, did you have a question for Mr. Wachter? If you could, yes or no? We can't hear you, so you either have to shake your head yes, sign out, and sign back in. Okay. We cannot hear you, Commissioner. So again, sign out, sign back in, and hopefully that will fix the problem. Okay. The next item is Heather Stouter to talk about density and conditional use thresholds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to, I guess, to sort of set the stage, we'll have several different staff participating in a presentation tonight of the policy issues that were listed on the agenda, and we'll try to create plenty of space between those items for discussion and questions. I want to remind the Plan Commission that tonight, while the city is focused on many issues related to housing, including direct investment, providing support for first-time homeowners, tonight our focus is really the zoning code. And so it's one small piece of things, but we think it's a very important piece of the housing puzzle and really examining our regulatory framework for housing. but it's certainly not the whole puzzle that the city is focused on with regard to housing. I think we're well grounded in our comprehensive plan adopted in 2018 after one of the more robust public participation efforts the city's ever seen. One of the main things we heard during that process, not surprisingly, was that we, the city, need more housing choices at all income levels, all housing types, and particularly, we heard throughout the process that there's this need for the missing middle, something between larger apartment buildings and single-family homes. And I think you'll see that a lot of our focus tonight lies within that level. Just to ground us in a couple of the goals, strategies, and actions in the plan, we'll have a full range of quality affordable housing opportunities throughout the city. And the strategy here is to support development of a wider mix of housing types, sizes, and costs. Some of the specific actions relate clearly to the missing middle housing, life cycle housing for different types of households, and a variety of ownership structures. Another strategy, purely to increase the amount of available housing, and that's a big focus tonight, looking at adjustments to our conditional use thresholds and our allowable densities in various zoning districts to try to increase the amount of available housing. And then as you've reviewed, at least 3 other housing-related reports that have been accepted by the Common Council following Plan Commission review have included some of these recommendations in the past. And so really nothing that we're talking about tonight is brand new. There's policy guidance already for all of the issues that we'll bring before you this evening. We really look forward to your take on these and your direction for how best to move forward. So these are the 5 issues we'll be discussing. And as I said, we'll leave space between them for your discussion and Q&A. First, just some background, wanted to provide you, and I'll fly through these as a reference. We can always come back to them, but with a look of where have we seen our multifamily residential approvals in recent years. This is just a look at the city again since 2016. Here's where our housing has been approved. So we've got a healthy mix of infill and also a lot of growth on both the east and west sides. This is a breakdown by zoning district category. So you can see here that really, the majority, not the majority, but the highest category of housing has been added within our mixed use districts, closely followed by planned development districts. And then our multifamily residential districts here together make up probably the next highest amount of housing. When we look at our mixed use and commercial districts, this is a great look. These areas only make up about 7% of the city by acreage, and it's where we've seen a lot of our residential growth. Planned development and traditional residential planned districts comprise about 10% of the city. Our employment districts, and you'll see a lot of our residential growth here, particularly in the Cap East district, has taken place in our employment zoning districts. Employment districts comprise about 6% of the city. And then this is a look at the coverage of our multifamily residential districts, from our traditional residential varied 1 all the way up to traditional residential urban 2 and everything in between. These districts together only make up about 6% of our city's acreage, and the traditional residential urban districts make up less than 1% of the city's acreage. So this first policy issue, what we wanted to focus on, there are some fairly complex things here, but we wanted to both recalibrate our conditional use thresholds to allow for more housing to occur by right. We think that you'll see a very thoughtful approach here to allow for some additional housing to occur by right without discretionary review processes, really focused on missing middle housing in most circumstances. So we'll go through that. And then the second bullet here, within our mixed use and multifamily districts, we want to look at lot area reductions that will increase that cap on density and make it more consistent with the comprehensive plan categories. And meanwhile, take a look at reducing our usable open space requirements. I think that both of these would need to happen together in order to really allow for greater densities as consistent with the comprehensive plan. We're really going to focus on these families of zoning districts, our mixed use districts and our multifamily residential districts in the following slides. So again, just to ground us, this is the area covered by our mixed use and commercial districts across the city. And this table is, again, the result of a thoughtful look by staff at what changes we think are a really good starting point for the Plan Commission to consider. Making changes with regard to what are those thresholds for conditional uses? What makes something, what causes something to go to the Plan Commission? We have many, many different thresholds to take a look at here, whether it's the number of units, the size of the building, the amount of commercial space, or the heights. And many of you know from our Plan Commission agendas, sometimes one development might have a list of 6 to 10 different conditional uses that it's seeking. And a lot of them are driven by these thresholds. I want to look first at the threshold for number of units. And we're suggesting here that a place to start might be to increase those thresholds from 8 in the neighborhood mixed use district up to 24, from 24 to 48 in the traditional shopping street district, and from 24 up to 60 in the CCT district. As you'll see here, we're not looking at, as staff at least, we're not recommending any extreme changes that would allow for a 160 unit building to go through as just a permitted use. We think that by and large, a lot of the larger, more intensive redevelopment proposals would definitely still go through the same process that they do today. With regard to building size, I think when we really thought about this, building size seems to be a belt and suspenders approach. In other words, we think that it's redundant with regard to the number of units and the height that's already there. We don't think we necessarily need another threshold related to the size of the building. And so our staff recommendation would be to eliminate building size as an area where the conditional use could be kicked in. This is a very important one to take a look at. I think it's been focused on, for in recent years, and especially we've heard a lot about it since COVID. I don't want to utilize COVID as a way to really drive our policymaking just yet, but I think that it's in our minds, certainly. We have a very, very high threshold for the expectation for commercial space on the ground floor of mixed-use buildings. We have both a 75% ground floor area, which frankly we almost never see in buildings as approved, and 75 to 100% of the street frontage would be occupied by a non-residential use. Staff suggestions here are to simply eliminate the floor area threshold and also to reduce that street frontage threshold, maybe down to 50% in some districts, 25% in others. And then finally, with regard to height, we're not making any strong recommendations regarding height this evening. I think that height is working fairly well in our zoning districts right now. But one thing we might want to consider in the near future as BRT hopefully moves forward is whether we might want to increase the allowable heights in transit-oriented development areas in the future. And as one small note, we do think that right now we have number of stories and number of feet for the height, and we think that it might be worthwhile to increase the allowable height in feet. We're seeing that most floor-to-floor heights are greater than what we first assumed back when the zoning code was redone in 2013. Moving forward, so if we step outside of the threshold between permitted and conditional use, another important consideration is just what do these districts allow with regard to densities and usable open space? When you look at the lot area requirements, and in the mixed-use districts, this only pertains to purely residential buildings. There are no lot area requirements or maximum densities for mixed-use buildings. But if you have a purely residential building in one of these districts, the current lot area requirement would be 1,000 in the NMX district, which equates to about a 40-ish units per acre density. What we want to do is look at, again, thoughtful suggestions for decreasing those lot area requirements in these 3 districts in order to achieve densities more comparable to those recommended in the comp plan. And similarly, the usable open space requirements are large, and these do pertain to both purely residential and to mixed-use buildings. We think that reductions in the usable open space per unit might be warranted to really achieve the densities in the comprehensive plan that have been recommended. Moving through to the multifamily residential districts, I'll go through these pretty quickly too. We can always come back to them. So this is our, as you can see, really good coverage throughout the city in both the central city and the more suburban areas on the outskirts of the city. Right now, we have fewer conditional use thresholds in these districts that staff is recommending a change to. I think in our traditional residential varied 2 district, we might recommend moving from 8 to 12. And then in the suburban residential varied 2, might recommend moving from 8 up to 24 as a conditional use threshold. And then in the traditional residential urban 1 and 2 districts, and remember, these make up 1% of the city's area together. We have very little land dedicated to these districts. Right now, any multifamily project with greater than 8 units must get a conditional use. And we think that those numbers could be ratcheted up to 24 and 60, respectively, in order to not have to review every single multifamily project in those districts as a conditional use. We've made some recommendations with regard to height in the TRU1 and TRU2 districts, that perhaps taking that from 3 to 4 stories might make sense in those 2 districts alone. And then this is the next several slides will really cover this issue. We think that we're pretty far off with regard to our lot area requirements and thus our density caps within our multifamily residential districts. Let's see, first of all, there's only one change that we're recommending with regard to the maximum number of units, and that's that we might consider moving from 4 up to 6 in the TRV1 district. With regard to the lot area requirements, all of the V districts, I'll call them, these are traditional residential varied, suburban residential varied, all of them have a lot area requirement right now of 2,000 square feet per unit, which equates to about 22 units per acre. As you might remember, many of these zoning districts fall within the low-medium residential area within the comprehensive plan categories that calls for densities of up to 30. So our initial recommendation, and we think it's thoughtful and even maybe conservative, is to take a look at reducing that lot area requirement from 2,000 to 1,500 within these 4 districts, which would bring it more in line with the comprehensive plan density recommendation. And then in the TRU1 and TRU2 districts, we have similar recommendations to ratchet down that lot area requirement and thus allow greater densities more similar to the comprehensive plan recommendations. And again, just like within our mixed use and commercial districts, we think that usable open space requirements could be reduced in these areas in order to make that change meaningful. You can't change one and not the other and actually have a meaningful impact. When we looked at other cities, a quick, short list of other cities, what we saw is that very few had usable open space requirements for their multifamily districts. And most either had no lot area requirements at all, or their lot area requirements were far less than what the city of Madison's are. So we took a look at Minneapolis, St. Paul, Milwaukee. You can see their multifamily districts in Milwaukee go as low as 150 square feet per unit. Portland and Denver were 2 other cities that we looked at. Again, we can come back to these slides if you have questions, but we just wanted to ground this in at least a little bit of research into some other cities and what they're doing along these lines in their multifamily districts. And one analysis we did, just as an example of what we'll be able to do if the Plan Commission has further questions about these, we did a housing capacity analysis in our residential varied districts. So again, that's the TRV1, V2, SRV1, and SRV2. The districts that all have a common minimum lot area requirement today of 2,000. A majority of these are located within the low, medium, or medium residential areas within the city's comprehensive plan. And again, our recommendation initially is to take the lot area requirement from 2,000 to 1,500 in order to support the greater densities. And the following set of maps just show, again, a theoretical capacity analysis of what we could provide more of for the Plan Commission if you're interested. Again, this is the coverage of those districts. This is a look at today. The green is where we have, at least in theory, usable open space aside, but in theory, we do have additional dwelling unit capacity in the green areas today. And the red areas are currently overbuilt. They're already a non-conforming property based on just that lot area requirement. And so they're, the density on those lots is already more than the zoning code allows. Today, we have approximately 20 to 25,000 units within this area of the city. And our theoretical capacity, not counting usable open space requirements, our theoretical capacity today is for about 15,000 new units in just the varied areas. If we were to ratchet our lot area requirement down to 1,500 square feet per unit, raising the density cap thus to about 29 or 30 units per acre, we would have more theoretical additional capacity. Again, none of this happens without changes to usable open space, but just looking at that lot area requirement, we'd have the capacity for about 29,000 additional units, more than doubling what we have in this area today. And then finally, a more bold approach, just to take a look at what it would do if we reduced the lot area requirement to 1,000 square feet per unit. Well, we could theoretically have the capacity for 55,000 new units. So about tripling, more than tripling what we have today just in this area of the city. And so that's just a look at the analysis. And again, I want to stress that doesn't include usable open space. We would need to really examine that as well. And it's much harder to do geographic information system analysis on our usable open space than it is just on the units per acre. So this is what we've produced for you yet for discussion this evening. And I think we want to take the next 20 minutes or so to discuss these things. And I'm more than happy to come back to any slides within this section, but want to kick it to the Plan Commission to let us know what you think looks good about this. Let us know what you maybe want to know more about, and what direction you want staff to head in with regard to these both conditional use thresholds and the lot area requirements.
Thank you, Ms. Stouter. That's a lot of information, some good data to help commissioners think about this. This, I think, is the most complex question that we'll be talking about tonight. Not that the other ones aren't challenging, but this is the most complex one. I would like to unmute Commissioner Cantrell and make sure that he, if he has a question for Mr. Wachter yes, okay, it looks like it's working. Did you have a question for Mr. Wachter before he?
Well, I guess my question for him was when Madison is not an isolated city. We're a metro area. And I know that our vacancy rate is low and we've been building apartments, but our surrounding communities have also been building many, many apartments. So in those cities, did we ever look at the metro area and the vacancy rate and that sort of thing? Or I understand why we just look at Madison, but I guess that's my question.
Mr. Wachter, do you want to put your, there, now you've got your hand up. Okay, go.
So as an analog to a lot of the city reports, the county has a countywide news report that gets at a lot of the same things. And I think the story of the rest of the county is each community is very different. A number of the suburban communities, the villages, they have very firm restrictions on the number of units, and they have some explicit goals calling for a certain amount of the city to be single-family residential. So hard to sort of paint a broad picture of the county. And we're also very lucky in the city of Madison that we have much better vacancy data than almost any other place in the country because MG&E reports out on a quarterly basis on zip codes. So we know exactly what's happening here. But I can certainly get you that county report that gets at sort of where all of the, where all these other places are at. But general shortage as well as the shortage of the story.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Wachter and Commissioner Cantrell. Did you have any other questions, Commissioner Cantrell?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I have a question about usable open space requirements. So the recommendation is to reduce the requirement, but the other cities that you reviewed, overall don't really have a usable open space requirement at all. So why reduce rather than eliminate altogether?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I think as staff, we're definitely open to some direction from policymakers on this issue. We are a city that's very rich in parkland, both from a equitable distribution standpoint and an acreage per capita standpoint. I think that the argument could be made for reducing or eliminating usable open space with multifamily residential development. I think for this exercise, we tried to look at meaningful reductions that we thought would really still promote especially that missing middle scale development, while not taking such a significant policy turn. But I think that's something that we'd be certainly open to.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Did you have any other questions, Alder?
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Chair. This is a lot of information to get right in 25 minutes and only have 20 minutes to discuss it. So I am not really ready to tell you what I think deeply about any of it. And I kind of hope we don't really fall into that, because I don't want to send you down a path that later on, when I think about it more, others do, we might say, what about this? So that's just my own personal, the way I absorb knowledge would have been helpful to get this PowerPoint in advance. Having said that, I spend a lot of time thinking about the TSS district. And I don't know that I have the answers to whether there should be more dwelling units or all the various things that are the conditional use standards. But on a 60,000 foot level, we basically the message we give to people who are maybe what I would call the smaller infill developers is that they have to have mixed use to make it easy to build. And so taking that requirement away or having different categories of a TSS district, I think would be helpful in my world. And also in my world is a historic district. And I would really like to see a TSS district that had a historic component to it. Because while I get that, people see the message of all that green when you changed it, to me this says, is that demolition? What does that mean, when it's in my district? So, and I don't want to be just all about my district, but that's, of course, what I think about. So, I would like to have, I guess I don't really understand all the things that when you plop in, if it's this many or this many, what it means. So my question would be is when you say we could do this many more units, what are you thinking that looks like? What happens when those units show up? Is that like an ADU or a demolition and something different?
Okay, sure. Great question. I think that it could take different forms, but my thinking is that it probably depends on the lot size. So the SRV2 districts in a lot of our the peripheral portions of the city, very large lots with multifamily residential on them. Perhaps in some of those cases, it could support a whole new small apartment building if we were to reduce the lot area requirement. Whereas in the isthmus areas, if we think about a very small, typical urban lot, perhaps it's adding one more unit to an existing single-family home, or taking a 2-unit to a 3-unit, which is tough because that takes it from the residential to the commercial building code. So that shift from 2 to 3 is a real tough hurdle. I do think that there certainly is some room for just adding one more unit to an existing single family unit when you get in the smaller lots. But again, I think it really depends on the size of the lot as far as what form those additional units are going to take. And some of them will never be economical to do. If you have a very well-performing 2-flat, for instance, on a small urban lot, it might not ever be economical to take it to a 3-unit, whether that involves demolition or adding a 3rd unit to that property. And so I think that like today, even if we do ratchet down the lot area requirement, there will be a lot of properties that it's not economical to really embrace that or to invest in that way to take it to the very max of what the zoning would allow.
Thank you, Ms. Stouter. Did you have other questions, Alder Rummel?
Oh, I'm sure I will, but I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I guess this is related to something that Alder Rummel mentioned. I'm interested in how a lot of this will intersect with the historic preservation plan and the many undone, maybe area plans and things that the preservation plan was recommending. So it'll be important, I think, to reference that in terms of the different zoning district changes that are being proposed and make sure that they kind of follow the spirit of the preservation plan. And perhaps you've already done that, but I share that concern. I guess I have two other questions. You mentioned the reduction, eliminating, I guess, the commercial floor space requirement on the ground floor and lowering the street frontage maybe to 50%. And you said that almost none of them meet 75% now. So we're constantly, considering a conditional use to waive that. Do you think the 50% would need to be waived too, oftentimes? And that's one question. And my other question is, as an isthmus alder, I'm looking at those green areas on that one map, and I'm concerned about stormwater and reducing lot requirements in areas of the city, not just the isthmus, that have problems with stormwater and needing some open lot space. So those two questions, I guess.
Yeah, I think let me just share screen on the first question here. So the commercial, the requirement for commercial space within mixed use buildings. So right now we have two. Again, we have one that's just 75% of that whole ground floor area. That's one that we almost never see. And the reason for that is because almost always part of that ground floor area is parking or circulation and not, active commercial space. With regard to the second one, which we think is the more meaningful when you think about activating streetscapes, it's how much of that street frontage is a non-residential use that can be more active, storefront windows, et cetera. I do think that we would still see, some requests for conditional uses if we were to reduce to 50% in the NMX and TSS and to 25% for the commercial corridor transitional district. But I think we'd see fewer. And especially if we eliminate this ground floor area piece, then I think we're maintaining what, in staff's mind is the most important piece of that commercial requirement. So that's I guess a quick answer to that question. And then with regard to the other one, and I'm glad you asked it, I think that, it's really important to note here that we, at least in planning, are still gaining a better understanding of the new stormwater ordinance. And this in no way would trump our city's stormwater ordinance. And so those stormwater requirements would hold true for development, regardless of how the zoning might change in order to allow for more units on a property. If you're starting from scratch with brand new, relatively small multifamily development, that might still involve some green roofs. And I think that's just I'm really glad you asked it, because I want to stress that this doesn't negate any of the new stormwater requirements, nor does it negate requirements in local historic districts. That is a separate standing ordinance that would still be in place regardless of changes to the base zoning. And so I kind of want to add that to this whole realm as well, that we're not through zoning looking at changing requirements that occur in other chapters of the ordinance.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up, not really a question. I understand the thing about local historic districts, but there's so much other stuff in the historic preservation plan that was recommended that we pursue, and so I'd want to, make sure that those things unrelated to local historic districts were considered too. But thanks.
We do have Matt Tucker with his hand up. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add to answer Alder Heck's question?
Yes, particularly related to the question about usable open space as it relates to stormwater. So when we were talking with the city engineering department about the stormwater ordinance, when they were working on it, one of the recommendations that came out of that was that we take a look at the requirements for usable open space, because these two things are not necessarily connected. You can have places or spaces on properties that have that are usable, qualifying as usable open spaces, that are terrible related to the management of stormwater. There just isn't an intelligent link between the two things. The closest regulation we have is a lot coverage regulation. So really, the stormwater ordinance works related to lot coverage, not necessarily what qualifies as a usable open space in the zoning ordinance, which is a very technical thing. And it's also a sort of a relic of our old 1966 ordinance. Kind of getting to what the question that Alder Lemmer was asking earlier. It's something that was kind of carried through because it wasn't gotten rid of, but it's a very uncommon requirement, something you don't find in cities that are comparable to Madison or other even smaller cities in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Did you have any further questions then, Alder Heck? No. Okay, we've got several raised hands here. That's good. Commissioner Sundquist, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Couple comments and a question or two. So first, the whole idea of getting rid of some of these conditional uses for these really low thresholds, like the 8 units that come up all the time, I completely agree with. I think I'm trying to remember back to the Z-Crack days and why those levels were set so low. I think there was some fear. People just wanted control. They wanted to be able to keep having these conversations, but we see where it gets us. We get agendas that are full. Maybe they get put on the consent agenda, even though there's a conditional use, and we're not getting much out of those conversations. What I'm trying to say. I will say though that in general, for both that and other limits that we want to raise in terms of units per acre, any kind of density thing, it's going to be really important to bring along this conversation that we've been in on TDM, the parking, the MOPES thing. So these other elements that will make, if we're going to do these by right, make that easier to deal with for neighborhoods, and they will have some confidence that they're not going to have all the negative impact. So I forget which speaker at the very beginning talked about not giving away just lots of extra density without any other restrictions. I think we got to look at both of those at the same time. On the first floor retail and the general notion of mixed use, I agree with Heather's comment that street frontage is probably more important in activating the street. There may be other ways besides retail to do that. It may be the employment uses, or some other thing could also be some way to kind of have activity in the street frontage. And I do agree that we're having trouble with that whole first floor. The aspirations to make the whole first floor into retail. I think that's probably something that needs to be looked at. On the other hand, it really depends on the context. There are places in the city that really need the mixed use, and this is another thing that we have to be cognizant of if we're going to change these districts. Make sure that our mapping includes enough mixture of uses, even if it's in a different district that's nearby, in the developing areas of the city, so that we we don't end up with this residential only in those places, like the Viridian development that whose name I'm forgetting to the east of Easttown Mall that was going to be this mixed use nirvana, and then they had trouble with the recession and came back, and now it's all residential basically. So that's I think a big failure. I think we rolled over on that. So if we're going to take it, if the districts aren't going to require it, the map, somehow we have to make sure that we take care of that. So those are my comments. Then just a question, again, going back to one of the speakers, mostly the conversation here was about changing limits on zoning districts. What about housing types, specifically the co-op that Mike Basford mentioned? Is that, I don't think that's anywhere on our agenda. We have ADUs. Is that something that we should also put on the list as a potential conversation?
Yeah, I think I could let Matt speak to that. I think there's work being done on that as we speak, co-ops.
Yeah, that was started before when I was still older. So Matt, do you have anything that you can comment on about that?
Yes, I can. I can tell you it was started, the effort that we started to update the sort of the thresholds for cooperative housing to be catching the conditional use requirement. We had it, I thought, completed, and then we've been working closely with some folks that want to do housing cooperatives, and they have asked us to expand the allowable districts where cooperative housing might be permissible. This kind of relates to the what Mr. Basford said during his public comment, and that conversation involves much more than the group of alders that we were talking with about just working within the constraints of the existing ordinance and where the use is allowed. And so we're going to be, over the next few months, engaging the alders that are in zoning districts that currently don't allow housing cooperatives, so they can understand when an amendment comes forth, what that means. And I am in active conversations with Alder Heck and Alder Carter, who are the two original sponsors of that amendment. Coming soon to a plan commission near you.
Thank you very much for that update. I found it interesting and good that it's going forward. Commissioner Sundquist, did you have more questions or comments or follow-up?
Not right now, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to thank staff for all their time putting everything together. Going through all of this, it was just really impressive. I know it took a lot of time. Two quick comments. Looking at the lot area proposed changes, when I was looking at that, it reminded me of a project we just approved at Packers Avenue at the old Hertz site. And I think even UDC brought this up, that, you know, the commercial space really makes sense right there. And I think the entire reason they had commercial space was if they didn't, they would lose like 25 units or something. It was substantial. So I think that's kind of, at least that helps me kind of picture what that adjustment could look like. And also in terms of the open space requirements, the Alder Lemmer brought up as well. I would certainly be supportive of reducing that and also making it more consistent across zoning districts, just based on my experience. I think it was CCT that has a pretty high open space requirement, and sometimes, you know, that can lead you to switch to a different zoning district, even though that other zoning district like TE doesn't really make sense for the type of project that you're doing otherwise, but you have to do it because you can't meet the open space requirement. So I think that having that a little more consistent and also lowering the requirement would allow people to, you know, pick a zoning district that really fits the project that they're doing. Those are my two comments.
Okay. Commissioner Spencer.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of quick comments that have already been touched on. I completely agree with Commissioner Sundquist's concerns about removing commercial or retail out of those mixed use. For me, particularly, those developments that are coming up on the far west or far east sides of town, I just don't want to see strictly residential out there. It should be a mix to reduce people's trips and to have amenities out there. And I think I might be the only one that has a little bit of pause about the open space requirements. I like having the open space. I think it's nice amenities for residents. I'm totally supportive of reducing that, of course, when it makes sense. I think for me, if it's possible, I'd like to see the location of parks, bike lanes, and other sort of recreational outdoor places near these developments, not as a condition, but just, curious, just to make sure that residents have access to those amenities that Madison is so famous for, that we all like. I think the park open space contribute to general health and wellness, and I just wanted to put that out there. But I am supportive of looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Commissioner Hagenow.
Yep, fair. And I also want to piggyback on Commissioner Solheim's appreciation to staff, especially, and everybody else involved in helping to put this meeting together tonight, and all of the documents that you've provided us. They have been very helpful. Along a couple of comments, I am also in favor of reducing some of that usable open space requirements that are out there. I do think we have to make sure that we are doing that in a thoughtful manner. But at the same time, if you are within easy walking distance to a park, it's very easy to just go down there and use that space versus requiring another developer to have basically another park on their property that may or may not get used as it could be. Two questions I had. Really, the one of the public comment speakers had brought up this idea of a zoning district that kind of streamlined the approval process for affordable housing properties, in particular development. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? And I don't know how that would look. And I guess having had the zoning code just been rewritten, I don't know what the odds of that are happening. But I did like that idea.
Ms. Stouter, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think we can talk a little bit more about this on item 4, but I want to say and just remind the commission that as much as we might not understand it and not be able to grapple with it easily, Wisconsin is really precluded from using zoning in any way to specify the cost of units, and so to limit cost or require affordability. And so it's one of those tools that instead of using the zoning code for, the city uses direct incentives through financial subsidy. So I think that there might be some interplay that we can discuss with regard to what the process is for certain affordable housing projects, but I think we'll get to that with item 4, if that's okay.
Certainly, yeah, definitely. And then one other question that had kind of popped into my head is, I'm very supportive of a lot of the changes, I think, overall here. But what impact did anybody look at? What impact these changes would have had on prior developments that have come through? And if so, I mean, I can think of some off the top of my head, but I don't have any idea over like the last year or the last 5 years what that would have looked like for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, Madison has seen so little in the way of small multifamily development, small scale multifamily development, that I can't point to a list of 20, 30 projects that would have moved through the process by right if we were to make these changes. And, part of that, I think we still would really love to move forward with these in order to really promote that scale, the predictability that goes along with having an ability to move forward with a by right permitted use project may make things a little different for that missing middle scale. There are a couple of examples that I can share. Just in your mind's eye, there's a project on Atwood that's a 5-unit mixed-use building. Liz Lauer's office is there. She was the developer of the building. Again, 5 units. It's a 3-story mixed-use building. There's one where Strictly Discs is on Monroe Street with, I think, 7 apartment units in a mixed-use building. Those are 2 small-scale ones. There's one example on off of Cottage Grove Road, right by the Y on the east side. That's just a 9-unit apartment building right behind a gas station. And it was a first-time developer that did that. It's nice, and it's right off a transit corridor. We don't see very many of that scale. There's one that Commonwealth Development just got approved recently, and that's probably the most recent. It's an 11-unit building in the neighborhood mixed-use district on Raymond Road that's not yet constructed, just recently approved. But the list of projects at that scale is pretty short, and that's one reason that we want to proactively do this to try to promote more development at that scale.
Absolutely, I like it. I think we're all on the right track. So thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Hagenow, and thank you, Ms. Stouter. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I'm also supportive of making these smaller unit buildings, 8 units up to 24, I think is recommended by staff as a permitted use. I think that may encourage more development of those, and I think that's appropriate. I guess I have a question like Commissioner Hagenow. I think many of the projects that we've seen recently, we've actually approved much greater density on those developments than what the zoning district allowed. I think just these last couple meetings we had buildings proposed that were the district said 90 units and we approved up to 134 or something like that. So I think that looking back, if staff could and looked at some of those that we've already approved, I think that what they're proposing is probably right on target. I would also support reducing the open space on the lots. I think that looking at the other cities, I think that's we should be doing that. Open space is important. I agree with that, but I think that we need to consider a reduction as what staff is proposing. I also agree with looking at the street frontage that staff is proposing for the mixed-use buildings. I think again the building on Packers Avenue is a prime example of we're typically always reducing that amount of mixed-use commercial retail. In areas that we want to at least allow a placeholder for that, I think maybe having some units that could be converted back to office retail in the future would be appropriate. I think we did that on a couple projects on the far west side. But I think staff is pretty much right on target with what they're proposing. I would like to get this information and do a more thorough evaluation. It would have been nice to get it beforehand, but I understand that that may have not been possible. But I think staff is right on target with many of these things. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Chair. I have been listening to this conversation and appreciate the different comments and do appreciate the drive to get more density. When people were talking about less open space, one of the ideas that popped in my head is, and it's my understanding this was discussed previously, but not necessarily tonight, is can we require more green features of a building if they aren't doing open space? So for example, can we be looking at green roofs, solar panels, other types of green features like that? Because one of the advantages of requiring open space is it helps minimize the impact of these dense buildings. And so I really would, like the staff to consider, if possible, when buildings hit a certain level, that in order to avoid the conditional use and be permitted use, that there are requirements for different green infrastructure stuff in the building, because I think that really would help minimize the impact of larger density.
Thank you, Alder. Ms. Stouter, did you have any reactions to or comment on that?
Not much now. I do want to see, what our results are going to be from the new stormwater ordinance. I think that's going to go a long way along those lines. So that's something that I think as staff, we're really waiting to see what the impacts of that will be on different scales.
And I will just mention too, we have some folks who are looking at some various sustainability features. Commissioner Sundquist is kind of spearheading that effort, so hopefully we will see some recommendations come out of that also, because I think we're all very interested in sustainability features. So thank you, Alder. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Chair. And I know I started out with a little kind of grumpy, so I want to say I do appreciate a lot of the work that's done. And when I think about what drives me as someone who's trying to protect the character of the downtown, which includes, more older housing stock, is that we need to look systematically at the edge to make sure we're adding density in ways that help build neighborhoods like the ones that people want to live with in the older part of the city. So, these compact places where, theoretically you could, do all your, grocery shopping and banking and whatever else you might do wandering around the neighborhood, right in your neighborhood. And so I do also agree, like allowing more density in these edge areas is really important. I mean, the other factor is, how do we get transit out to areas when that's such low density? Because you almost have to have a car, and and the percentage of people that can take the bus is going to be low. But the more people you add, the more opportunities there are for transit, and the more chances people would be able to use it. So I think, if we talk about wanting to have equity in transportation and land use, we have to have more density at the edge. It's done appropriately. And I agree with the people that talked about making sure that there is mixed use there. And so when I say, in the TSS, maybe not everyone has to have that, but I do see the importance of it. But as I mentioned at that Plan Commission recently, we don't know what the future of retail is. I mean, not only with COVID, but even just trends about online shopping makes it kind of hard to assume that everything that you'll build will get filled up with some store as opposed to a bar or restaurant. So bars and restaurants seem to end up in every neighborhood, but some of these sort of basic goods and services stores don't. And the question I do have is the open space, and I'm hearing everyone kind of liking it, but and again, it's maybe my own lens, but whenever I see a project in my world, the developer has filled up every bit of ground floor space with building. There's not any at-grade green space usually, or if there is, it's almost like a special gift. So then the green space or open space tends to be either on the roof or a patio. And so when you say, you should limit that or reduce it, I want to make sure I understand how that relates to what I just said, because I'm not sure I do. I mean, I can see how in sort of the TR and SR things, like if you made less of a backyard setback, somebody could add something to their house or the two flat. And I think I'd support that, but I just don't really understand for new construction, and especially in the core, what that means. Thanks.
Ms. Stouter, did you want to comment on that? And I will also point out that we are 15 minutes behind our schedule, that we don't have to be right on it. But I would caution the people that are in the queue, and I've got one more plan commissioner in the queue. We're going to want to move on if we can. So, Ms. Stouter.
Yeah, just briefly. So usable open space has a a numeric requirement of number of square feet per dwelling unit. And then in some districts, the more urban and mixed use districts, you can meet that requirement through structured usable open space. So through that patio, through the rooftop, et cetera. Whereas in some of our other districts, like I think the TRV1, TRV2, that has to be met at grade. And so I think we could do two things. I think we could reduce that number from the higher, say it's 500 square feet per unit today, reduce that number substantially, but also perhaps let patios, rooftops, decks, et cetera, count toward that usable open space in the districts where it doesn't already. So they're related. I don't know if Matt has anything else to add there, but.
Mr. Tucker.
Real quickly, like what we're hearing too is people that want to live in urban environments don't necessarily want or need open space on their property because we're very rich in parkland. There's a lot of opportunities in proximity. It's almost like people have to sacrifice areas next to dumpsters, buy air conditioning equipment, just poor quality areas to mathematically meet the code requirement for what is an otherwise good project. It's really an obstacle and fundamentally an outdated principle. More broadly, like the quality of the space and how good the space is what people seem to add value to or care about when we hear it from a perspective that isn't in the ordinance. It's how people look at projects and look at them generally if they're good. And so right now it's very limiting because it's so prescriptive and the requirements are so expansive.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Did you have any more, Alder Rummel?
Not right now, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I'm going to reiterate my concern about lot coverage requirements, eliminating those entirely. I would just want to make sure we carefully consider what the stormwater ordinance, the new stormwater ordinance, what that pertains to and what it doesn't, because I fear getting rid of permeable surfaces entirely. But it might be possible. I'm not opposed to it if we can guarantee some of those solutions to those concerns. My only other point is about density, particularly in larger projects. If we increase the density threshold substantially, are we going to wink and really consider 50% above that too, as we do now? I think we need to kind of establish how we were going to treat requests for over that amount. And that could be a concern. And the whole missing middle thing, I mean, I'd love it if we could build to look like that image that everybody shows. But I'm actually, even though I'm not opposed to raising the density levels for the smaller scale projects, I'm skeptical that they'll get built still because of economics. But those are my comments.
I think.
Thank you, Alder.
We're not recommending any changes to the lot coverage requirements at all. It's confusing. We're looking at the lot area requirements per dwelling unit. So if you have a 4,000 square foot lot and your lot area requirement is 2,000, then that lot maxes out at 2 units. Okay. We're not recommending any lot coverage, so permeability, none of that whatsoever this evening. And then I think in answer to your second question, in the zoning code, those lot area requirements and thus the density caps are absolute. We never, as a plan commission, can change those. Where we do sometimes push the limits on density is if things are happening in our mixed use and commercial districts or our employment districts that aren't beholden to a lot area requirement, they don't have a density cap. Instead, we're looking at the plan recommendation and making sure that it's close to that plan recommended density range. And so I want to stress that the changes that we're recommending are really to our multifamily residential districts and for purely residential buildings in mixed use districts where those zoning requirements are really absolute.
Thanks. Makes sense.
Thank you, Ms. Stouter, and thank you, Alder Heck. Okay. We are beyond our time. We have 2 people who are in the queue who are not plan commissioners I'm going to recognize you, but ask that you be very brief if you could, please, and let us know what you're thinking. So, Ms. Morrison.
Thank you. Thanks for having the Housing Strategy Committee this meeting. Had a lot of recommendations, and I think they're great. Appreciate the staff. I just wanted to speak really briefly to the open space requirement and to reiterate that most developers seem to be meeting it through balconies and decks. So it's not at grade again, as in most cases. And to say that, tenants aren't valuing that space. We rarely see people out on their balconies, especially along. Those balconies also add costs that impact affordability, create long-term water issues for buildings, et cetera. And then I wanted to just speak to one of the alders' comments about green space. In the case of the building that we just had approved by Plan Commission on Monday, we actually had to change green roofs that we were expecting as green roofs to open space to meet that requirement. And even after doing that, we were only able to get about like 60% of the recommended density in that area. So I don't think we're talking about taking away green space, and I think it is belt and suspenders, and I wanted to add that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Mr. Porterfield.
Okay, make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me there?
Yes.
Okay, I got a short list here of things. Thanks again for inviting us to your meeting. A lot of the things that people said I agree with. First thing, missing middle that people are talking a lot about here. I think that the metric on that should not just be the building form, but also the missing middle in terms of the affordability. And those two things sometimes go together, but not always. They don't always equate each other. But I think that there's a missing middle in terms of affordability for people that don't necessarily fit into the income bracket that are benefit from affordable housing resources, but still can't afford to live in Madison. And that's an important factor to keep in mind. Second thing is the accessory dwelling units. My thinking on that is that you should really think about where you're going to be doing new subdivisions or new infill kinds of subdivisions. I think there's going to be a lot of disruption if you try to introduce that into existing locations. But in a new subdivision, I think there's a very strong and constrained market for something along those lines that would provide that kind of housing where people are buying into it.
And yeah, we will be looking at ADUs as our next item. So
okay, good. So I just want to make sure I got that comment in. And then in terms of the increased density, another metric that's important to think to consider on this is the social impact of the increased density. That has implications across a lot more than zoning. That I think that the city should contemplate and think about things that could impact, that could bring other resources to bear to help to make that palatable and a high quality of life. In terms of open space, I agree with one of the previous comments. The quality of the usable open space is the most important thing, not so much the amount of it, but how quality is it. The more condensed it is, you can definitely put in higher quality amenities into that to make it very, very attractive and valuable to people that are living in it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of space if it's very well thought out and designed. And then in terms of the commercial, I just wanted to make a comment that one of the comments that was made earlier, I think some flexibility on commercial right now in terms of the market for that, with the pandemic and other resources that we have going on right now, I think that the commercial space is, the demand for that, and the ability to finance it and the need for it is very, very, I think for some time in the near future is going to be very muted, but the need for it in the future is there. So potentially providing for flexibility with the developers so that they can convert that in the future to another use is a really good idea, I think. Okay. And then I don't know, one more thing, and that is the multifamily affordable housing district. I understood from Heather that maybe having legal problems to do, but it was a great idea. If you could do it, it would really make a big difference in terms of having the discussion with the neighborhood and the community in advance without having a specific project that's associated with, having to defend that and make that happen, and having that argument in advance would be very helpful. It's a way to do it. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Porterfield. Okay, I do not have any other speakers in the queue. I'm going to just summarize what I think I saw, but I'm going to look to Ms. what I thought I heard, but I'm going to look to Ms. Stouter too. It seems that there's consensus on the commercial spaces and changing that so that we're looking more at the street frontage and not so much at the other. So the recommendation there seems to be, and I'm looking around at faces and I'm seeing some nods on that. Okay. My sense was that people are thinking that raising the number of units before we have to look at a conditional use, that in general, excuse me, people are looking favorably upon that. Okay, I see some heads not nodding up and down and one that's going around. So I would say let's bring that forward and continue to explore that, but that's going to need, I think, a little bit more discussion than maybe the commercial spaces does. So let's put that forward. In terms of the usable open space, there's also some bit of concern there, but some really good points about the quality of the open space and the availability nearby of quality open space. So I think that there's some potential to move forward on that with some maybe thought about, can we reduce the usable open space, but make the quality of that usable open space in some way better. So maybe we can look at that. The other thing that people seem to kind of pique their interest is the affordable zoning. And Ms. Stouter said that she doesn't think that we can do that, but I would like for us to ask our city attorney if there is any way to do that. It sure would provide a communication on what we're looking for as a city and the potential to move forward in various areas on that kind of housing. I don't know whether Mr. Strange has, Attorney Strange has any quick comments on that, or if we should just wait until Ms. Stouter has followed up on that. I don't see that he raised his, he has raised his hand. Okay, Attorney Strange.
Sorry, I couldn't find my button for a minute. So yeah, this is the question that I've been asked since I took over zoning several times. Of course, we have the Madison used to have an inclusionary zoning ordinance that the court struck down, and then recently the legislature stepped in and said, just in case you couldn't read that case, we're going to actually prohibit it in the statute. But what that says is that we cannot enact, impose, or enforce an inclusionary zoning requirement. And as I've been thinking about this, and I've been talking about it with staff, and I hear this idea about an overlay, I think it's really important for us to sort of think about this within the context of the devil being in the details. Mm-hmm. I like to pitch these things sometimes as incentives and not requirements. And so if we create an overlay district of some kind that is an incentive and not a requirement, are we going to get charged on it? Possibly, probably, maybe. But if we can point in that district to exactly the same right to build something there that doesn't have affordable housing, but we've streamlined the development process, or we've provided extra incentives, I think there's room to think about how that might work. So I certainly don't know exactly all of the details of Mr. Hoffert's plan that he proposed a little bit earlier. But I think we have been thinking as staff of creative ways to incentivize affordable housing short of requiring it. And I think that could take a variety of different forms within the context of conditional use, permitted use, some of the really sort of important things that the staff is suggesting tonight to remove some of the barriers to the exclusionary zoning that sometimes shows up in our zoning code. So I think it's important to keep an open mind and think about those things as a way to get around some of the inclusionary zoning prohibitions.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Strange. So I would include that thought on the list of things to look at trying to move forward on. Ms. Stouter, did I miss anything that you had heard that commissioners might be looking for?
I think there were just some allusions to it, but I would like any more clarity on the lot area requirement, which in a sense is that density cap. We'd like to again propose increasing the densities to be more consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's one important key element that I didn't hear in that summary that I'd just like to have some more direction on, if possible.
Commissioners, I see some head nods and a thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like, to proceed with that too. Okay. And again, these are not final decisions. I mean, as somebody said, the devil's in the details, and we're going to have to look at these things again. So this is a preliminary step forward. So thank you. Okay, then I'm going to say we are going to move on and look at ADUs. So Mr. Tucker. Okay, Mr. Tucker, you're up.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to run through a few slides here. We just had a few slides on the accessory dwelling unit issue, just above and beyond the materials we've sent out to you guys in advance of this meeting for review. And I'm going to share those towards the end. So just to get started, accessory dwelling units in the zoning ordinance are allowed. They are allowed at owner-occupied single-family homes, secondary units. They typically are separate detached structures that often include a garage. There's no requirement or impact on the density. There's no requirement or open space limit. However, oftentimes they get kind of caught up in the maximum size of accessory buildings or the amount of coverage on a lot that's permissible, that matter of lot coverage that we've talked about already today. They are conditional uses. Each one is reviewed and approved by the Plan Commission. Since we started approving ADUs in the new zoning code, I believe there have been 2 that have not been approved of the 20-ish so that have been applied for. One of the reasons for disapproval of one related to the property owner they had multiple larger accessory buildings and they just didn't want to take them down, and it was sort of a numbers of conglomerations of buildings on the lot question. And the second one that was denied, I think, was really tied up in a matter related to a waterfront development, which waterfront developments are special and sensitive. It was a garage that had an ADU attached to it, and it was a waterfront structure. So what we're thinking about here for the bullet points that you see are consider allowing ADUs interior to the building. These would be ADUs that could either be attached or as basement apartments by right. This is where someone could simply come in and secure a building permit for the construction, pay the associated impact fees and permit fees, and add the unit. Possibly also detached ADUs by right under some certain circumstances, depending on the size, placement, scale. Many communities that have allowed ADUs have moved to allowing ones that are of a certain size or scale or placement by right, and thus bypassing the conditional use process. Next slide. All right. So this slide shows all of the single-family use homes or properties in the city. So predominantly these are in single-family districts, but not always. We do have some in the 2-family and some in up to 3, and then you'll see some also in some of the if you're familiar with like the TRV districts in the Isthmus area. So all of these are places where potentially one would be able to request an accessory dwelling unit at their property. Next slide. And this map shows the distribution of where they have been approved. This isn't too surprising to see. Accessory dwelling units in their current configuration are very expensive. They're basically little homes. We've heard the cost range on the low end in the $100,000 range to build one, higher end approaching $250,000 to build one. That's construction costs, things that we can't necessarily manage. But we haven't seen so many of them because I think what we're finding is there's a few factors. One is, yes, they're very expensive, and you have to have wealth to be able to do that in whatever fashion that may be. Personal wealth, equity in your home, some condition like that. Financing is very complicated for these. These are things that we as a city can't necessarily get into from our regulatory tools, but we have been talking to some of the financial providers in our community about working on ways that these types of units could be financed as part of the financing of a home, similar to the way a 2-flat is financed. The opportunities, when you go back to that map before, one thing that's great about the map before this, it shows all the places where the single family is. There are some great locations in proximity to transit, great locations in proximity to places of employment, shopping, because our homes are placed in those layer areas. We have some that are further up, but we've got a lot of opportunity to allow for units to be added delicately into some of these existing areas. Finally, just going to show a couple of let's see, we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to screen share here, and I will show, let's see if I can get to mine. Let's see here. All right. So this slide shows these are the common types of ADUs that we typically see. It is typically a 1 or 2 level structure. Often, if it's a 2-level structure, over a dwelling unit, over a garage. Usually, the garage is the homeowners or the principal buildings place to park their vehicles, put their bikes, whatever. And then this is a secondary space. So the top two are 2 that we have approved in the past. And then location, they're typically located towards the rear of the lot. On the bottom is a map here, and I'm showing over where my cursor is. This is the street. You have the principal structure, and then you have the accessory dwelling located to the rear of the lot. Typically, it can be as close as 3 feet to the side and rear lot line. These are pretty large structures, and there has been some controversy about large structures placed that close to the lot line and impacting the neighbor's privacy and use and enjoyment of their properties. That can tend to be one of the issues of a rub on these. The next picture, we did approve 1 basement ADU. It was one of the first ones we approved. I went over and took a look at this, and I had some time to talk to the homeowner about how it worked. It's been very successful. It works great. The homeowner loves having it there. There's a person that is there watching the home when they're absent. They have spent half their time residing in the home and renting out the upper part of their house. And this is the basic layout. And this one was 475 square feet. This one, I'm going to show you some pictures of. This is built a bit into a hillside. The access is off to the side street here through behind this white fence. This is just the front of the home. It's a 2-story home with an exposed back. The next slide this is where the ADU is located. It occupies the area of this gray masonry, and it also occupies an area on the lower level behind this white wall here. The challenge I think we're going to see for having more attached ADUs is one, is how people live, and it's people wanting to have other people live with them in the same space where there's noise and there's not soundproofing and things like that. Most of the ADUs are separate because people that are able to build these want a sequestered and separate structure in the backyard, so not having a common wall or a common ceiling relationship. But these can be a very affordable alternative or option for people that are just looking to lightly add a small space in their basement to help them afford their mortgage or be able to buy a home. And with the way that the building codes work, these are 1 and 2 family homes when they're adding one to a single family home. 1 and 2 family home code is less expensive less complicated than the commercial building code that applies to 3 and up units. So anytime anybody's looking to add an additional unit to a 2-family unit that is an attached unit, they're going to run into the commercial building code. But that first map that we showed that showed all those areas that have single families, they can simply come in, comply with the building codes. Simply might not always be the easiest, but there's a window there to get to a permit relatively easy when you have egress and you have the life safety and fire separation requirements that are allowed. It effectively operates like a 2-family dwelling, but because of the size and those types of restrictions and the current limitation on the owner occupancy, you are kind of limiting who it is that is potentially having these units. And then this is what the inside of the unit looked like. The homeowner was talking to me about the challenge associated with this. This is a heating element that they had to stay above just to get head height, and you can see some of the exposed pipes and things like that. A little bit tricky to work around, but they were able to make it go, and they were very happy with this. And I think the city could see this as a great opportunity to add density and not really change much on the footprint or the space that the house occupies on the lot if they went down the path of encouraging this type of unit. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I do have one question. What zoning districts are you looking at doing this in?
The ADUs are allowed at any single family owner occupied home. So I think the idea would be consistent with that unless the Plan Commission has some other suggestions or advice.
So
it would be across the board.
So across the board, if it's single family, even in, some non kind of single family zoning district, then the owner could do that, could do the ADU.
That's correct.
And what is going to, if anything, preclude it from becoming a Airbnb?
Well, the city passed an ordinance this March that prohibited. I should say what it does is it allows Airbnbs or we call them tourist rooming houses, but you're only allowed to have the tourist rooming house within the dwelling unit that you occupy. So they practically wouldn't be able to be functioning as those tourist rooming houses because they would be non-compliant with that ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I understood what you said, Mr. Tucker. You're at this point not proposing anything related to not requiring that the property owner live in either the ADU or the main structure, correct?
No, I think the suggestion is to continue that policy, that it be the property owner lives in either the ADU or the main house unit, continuing the regulation as it applies today.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Mr. Tucker? Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, in order to give staff some direction on this, I guess I'm supportive of what they're recommending. I think that I remember that we denied one, at least since I've been on, ADU, and that was because it was on the lake. But I think that it should be a permitted use with some criteria that if they don't meet that criteria, then it may kick it to a conditional use where the Plan Commission would have to evaluate it. But I think, I think we can have some criteria where there's privacy on adjoining lots and those sorts of things, and is built appropriately. But I think that this is an appropriate amendment to what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Sorry, one more follow-up question. Let's say that ADUs proliferate as a result of easing up the conditional use requirements. How do you feel, Mr. Tucker, about building inspection, zoning staff's ability to enforce the requirement that one of the units be occupied by the property owners?
Well, I feel pretty good about it. We have a current requirement that a deed restriction needs to be recorded to assure that the property is transferring when a sale occurs to an owner occupant. That's our outside zoning, but a tool that we use to assure that that there's more beyond just our zoning ordinance that assures that this structure will continue on as a basically accessory to an owner-occupied single-family home. Now, I'm going to tell you that it's complicated, and those of you that have been involved in enforcement, it is not messy. It can be tricky, and there will be cases, and there will be people that'll attempt to pull things off. And what we do is we do a lot of detective and sleuthing, and we do prosecutions with our city's attorney's office to get the ordinances enforced, and that will happen just like it happens today, and just like it's happened for decades for the illegal basement apartments that we found across the city that we've been encountering. Our office has been encountering for decades.
Thanks.
That's it, Alder Heck?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alder Rummel?
Thank you, Matt. So you mentioned illegal basements. Do we allow them in attics, or is that get to the building code?
Yes, sure. They could be in the attic area. Often the attic is challenging to get up to because the building codes see it as a third level most often. I think we're talking about that. Not because usually it's not necessarily in a second level, but it could be. But up in the third level, you need a couple of exits to get out, or you need to have the building sprinklered with interconnected fire alarms and things. It's very difficult to add into the attic. But your district, particularly, Marcia, the older districts where the homes are also, they have very tall and they have very good head height, have some opportunity for adding units in attic, basement, or splitting up another way. The code doesn't really care. It doesn't describe where it should or shouldn't be.
Thanks.
That's it, Alder? Okay. Commissioner Spencer.
Thank you. I wasn't quite ready. I was wondering if at some point we could see some ADU ordinance examples from other cities. I think Vancouver, I know that Canada, but see some other examples. And I just wanted to say I am supportive of ADUs. I think it's something, really good for people at my generation who have aging parents and also children. It's a way to sort of live multi-generationally. I don't see a lot of that. I think this is a really good opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, there are no other raised hands. My senses go for it on this. And I'm seeing yes nods. Okay, good. Thank you. Moving on then to item number 3, Mr. Furco. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I think this might be a short discussion here. In many ways, this is a follow-up to a discussion. For those of you who were on the Plan Commission several years ago, these were some ideas that came out of some earlier work sessions. So simply speaking here tonight, another way that we want to address housing in the zoning code is to add a couple of additional districts. Earlier on, the first discussion, we talked about ways to to increase housing density and change some of the thresholds. But we also think that there's 2 districts that are likely missing. We don't have a formal proposal for those districts. We have some ideas how we could structure that. But before we went ahead and started that process, we just wanted to kind of introduce the concepts or reintroduce to the concepts to the Plan Commission, and then get a sense of direction if we should indeed proceed. The first district that we want to do is a new mixed-use district. What we find in looking at the comprehensive plan, we've got a range of recommendations. We've got neighborhood mixed use, community mixed use, up to regional mixed use being the most intense. What we're seeing when you compare that to the corresponding zoning districts, largely we've got districts that cover the lower end or lower intensity districts, including the limited mixed use zoning district, the neighborhood mixed use zoning district, and the TSS zoning district. really get at that low to medium intensity scale. But we really don't have a district outside of the downtown that we can use for regional mixed use type districts. Regional mixed use type districts in the comprehensive plan are generally recommended from 2 to up to 12 stories and don't have an upper limit on density. And we really just in the series of districts we have right now don't have a district that. Looking back in some notes, we've had some thoughts of how to structure that. Generally speaking, I think we could try to find the sweet spot between the TSS traditional shopping street district and then the UMX, which is a fairly intensive downtown district, and kind of find a spot in between those districts that would really help implement the regional mixed use recommendation plan. So that's one district. We're calling it RMU. I believe that's what's in the memo that was posted before the meeting. And so the RMU district is one. The second district is then an exclusive residential district. Similarly, if you think of the spectrum of residential districts we had, again, there's essentially these 6 districts that we talked about earlier this evening. We've got the V series or the varied series. These districts generally are intended to implement what's recommended as low, medium, and potentially medium density recommendations. But as we talked about in that earlier discussion, really it was in some ways not even hitting that medium density threshold. And then we have the U series or the urban series. Again, that's intended to kind of cover areas that are recommended for medium density and potentially higher density, but we really have some limitations again outside of the downtown. And so the district that we're looking at here, we're calling it a TRU3, the traditional residential urban 3, as a district that would be a step above the TRU2. Just putting this in context, the TRU2 has as it's drafted currently right now, the most intensive development district allows a maximum of not even just short of 90 dwelling units an acre. We certainly have projects and proposals and plan recommendations that would support greater densities. So again, looking to add a residential district, again, really to fill out the palette and district options. Certainly, once they're on the books, they'd be available for mapping or potentially, as plans are adopted or the Plan Commission and Common Council elect to change zoning, they'd be options. But at this point, this discussion would just be having staff kind of refine and get these ordinances for the Plan Commission. And I guess then react, have you guys take a closer look at what those specific standards might involve. So with that, that's all I have on these two. I try to keep this quick to get us maybe back on schedule. But a question.
Thank you, Mr. Furco. Quick question. Where did you have in mind for the TRU3? I mean, did you have some locations throughout the city in mind? What are you thinking?
I think generally it would be throughout the city here. And Heather is scrolling through the slides here, showing a variety of different areas. So you've got the Oscar Mayer that's in the plan. I think anywhere the TRU3 is going to be a possibility where you have districts where you have recommendations for medium and high density residential.
So anywhere in the city, basically.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think there's going to be. We certainly tie it to where the plans are. It could be part of, for example, Heather's got East Town Mall shown on the street.
Oh.
When that plan is done, I feel there's likely right now it's part of that's recommended for regional mixed use, and I feel that intensive district would really be an area to do that. I think it's also appropriate in along transit-oriented nodes and along BRT and so forth. So I think there's a wide variety of possible applications.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Furco, sorry, and or comments about these concepts. Commissioner Cantrell.
I think it's a great concept for those two districts. Very appropriate for the East Washington corridor. I'm assuming the buildings we have there were done by PUD, and they probably would have fallen into this category. Redevelopment of East Town and West Town is going to happen, and I think having districts that would be appropriate for that redevelopment is very appropriate. So I think that, again, staff is right on target with this.
I think this gets at part of what Alder Rummel was also pointing to have some of that more intensive development throughout the city. Commissioner Sundquist.
I agree with Commissioner Cantrell. Just an additional thought that with these more intense developments, it would be worth taking a look at not just the densities, but the parking requirements. There may be transit overlays that would affect where these go, and a lot of moving pieces, but would be for Madison really dense areas that you would hope wouldn't need as much parking as some of our lower density developments, and if we required a lot of parking, it would create some problems in those denser areas. So just I noticed in the materials that you guys handed out, I wasn't on Plan Commission 3 years ago when the document in response to the White House toolkit came out, but there's a whole bunch about parking in that. So I'm just trying to bring that back out of that document and apply it to this conversation.
Okay, good points. Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Did you have anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions or comments? Seeing none, my sense is that this is another one. Go forward. Head nods, yes, okay. Okay, very good. Then moving right along to city-funded affordable housing, and we have Heather and Lynette for this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll kick things off and then turn it over to Lynette Rhodes. Let's see, here. Apologies. So this is one where we don't have a strong single recommendation for the Plan Commission this evening, but wanted to have a conversation that I think's already started. After item 1, we talked a little bit about what are our limitations and possibilities for really incentivizing through zoning affordable housing. We have a lot of limitations, and we want to further explore our possibilities. One thing that we've been talking about as staff across the PCED and community development and planning especially is how might we consider revising or streamlining our land use approval process for city-funded affordable housing without giving up something that I think we all share value in, and that's ensuring that affordable housing is high quality and on par with the quality of other multifamily housing being constructed. 3 examples that I just wanted to show so that you have these in your minds. These are 3 examples of city-funded affordable housing projects that have obtained WIDA tax credits and are either under construction or recently approved that just went through the Plan Commission for a conditional use and demolition approval. So this is one called The Grove at Cottage Grove Road and very close to Atwood, and it's almost finished. I believe occupancy begins yet this summer. Here's one that was just approved by the Plan Commission a couple meetings ago on Aberg Avenue. And then a third, this is another almost complete project on Fair Oaks Avenue going up and I think due for occupancy this August or September. So those are 3, again, that went through the conditional use and demolition review by the Plan Commission, as well as thorough review by the city's community development staff and CDBG committee and ultimately the council for city funding for the affordable housing units that they delivered. And with that, I want to turn it over to Lynette, who can provide us with, I think, probably a much better picture of what the developers who are doing affordable housing, some of which are with us this evening, are facing with regard to the dual process of land use approvals and the funding process. And so, Lynette?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm not going to start my presentation with any data. I think Matt did a great job kind of laying that, and Attorney Strange hit on all of my points of what I was going to talk about on the state statutes that prohibit us from doing affordable housing. So I'm just going to talk really about how housing development really is. It's high risk, and the pre-development costs are expensive to developers. And especially for those that are interested in supporting affordable housing, at times that even has more costs and it's more complex financial structures to their deals. When people are looking at doing affordable housing deals, they're often leveraging many different types of funding to those deals. So that's additional application costs, additional fees. And so we're constantly looking at strategies on how we can help our affordable housing developers reduce those costs so it's not absorbed into those projects. So one of the strategies under our control is just looking at our city's internal approval process. And so some suggestions that we have for you guys that are under your purview is just looking at expediting the land use approval process for projects that have city funding. On average, the projects have about a 6 to 8 week process right now to get approved. So that means that's holding costs, the pre-development costs to get that to you guys. It's very impactful. And if it was cut a little bit shorter, I think that could help a lot, especially with potential holding costs. We also would like to review just kind of how our committees are structured in this approval process. So many of the developments that get city funding, city funds have to go to UDC, they go to the CDBG Commission, and they go to the Plan Commission. So city staff are doing a really good job, and each year we're improving on how we're coordinating and streamlining our goals and objectives. So if CDD has a mission, we want to make sure our teammates in planning understand our mission and are supporting us, and that we are looking at deals that are within both of our goals and objectives. And we'd really like to make sure the committees are doing the same. One of the reasons that we, made sure that we're inviting the Housing Strategy Committee to this conversation as well, so we can start expanding some of those conversations. I just want to touch on 2 other points that aren't about so much our approval process, but you guys talked about them earlier in zoning that I think are very impactful for affordable housing. And that is talking about how many units can be built by right. Again, streamlining that process. A lot of our affordable housing developments, especially the developments supported by our nonprofit housing providers, are usually more on the smaller side. So that would be extremely helpful. And then also that looking at reducing those requirements for the first floor commercial. That is something that we are hearing from our affordable housing developers, that is a struggle for them at times of finding that commercial partner that would go into that space. That's all.
Okay. Are there questions? Commissioner Sundquist.
Quick comment about the streamlining, and I don't remember exactly where the subsidies came from on some of the projects, but there is an issue about where some of them end up being located in the region, and the ones that end up outside of Metro's service area or on the very fringe of it are a concern for me as a plan commissioner. So it, I don't know if it was a WIDA project or city subsidized or just what, but those aren't really good. So it would be a lot easier to streamline some of these and wave them through if they were located better. Some of them are, but we've had a few that really deserve being some scrutiny and maybe even being turned down. You end up with this bad choice between turning down potentially affordable housing, but allowing housing that isn't really that affordable because of the transportation and housing costs associated with it. Mm-hmm. So I would just say keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out ways to get what we want that's better and easier and streamlined.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I do have a few thoughts on this. Just thought when, based on what Commissioner Sundquist brought up, that that and also the kind of affordable housing, maybe incentive zoning or something we were discussing earlier, it would be interesting to line that up with the city's affordable housing funding map and the preferred and now super preferred areas. I think that would be a really good reference when looking for where to put to those districts if we're able to do that. I also wanted to talk about in terms of streamlining, I'm very supportive of that for affordable housing projects. You know, I know that we've moved to having specific zoning districts instead of UDs, which I completely support. But the one very helpful thing when working on an affordable housing project was having a GDP in place. And there's, you know, a lot fewer initial submittal requirements tied to getting a GDP. And you can kind of know, okay, I can go up to this many units without submitting the most detailed engineering plans and everything else that we see with traditional zoning districts, and that can really help cut out some of those early pre-development costs that you incur before knowing if you even have your funding in place. So if there could be perhaps something exploring as a way that we could, you know, still review projects before they're submitted to ensure that we're meeting zoning requirements, but delay some of those more expensive third-party plans and reports, that would be really helpful. Also, expediting really helps in terms of timing and finding sites. You know, this is pretty specific to the WIDA timeline right now, what I'm talking about. But right now, if you're going to meet, you know, WIDA's annual December deadline, you really have to have a site identified, you know, a month or two ago so that you can get everything done in time. And so something might come up in September that's a really viable site, but you can't get it zoned in time. You can't hold it for another year. That really reduces opportunities. And then lastly, I also just want to say that my experience was a lot of times staff from planning as well as community development would attend the initial neighborhood meetings for projects that were pursuing affordable housing funds. And I think that's really a valuable tool because there are a lot of neighborhoods that are supportive of affordable housing, which is really amazing in Madison, but there's also a lot of neighborhoods that, you know, it can be worrisome. And it's really helpful to have staff there to be another voice to talk about the need in Madison and not just be a developer, you know, trying to convince someone about why affordable housing is needed. To have someone else kind of reinforce that and paint the picture is really helpful from that neighborhood perspective in terms of getting those approved and through that process.
Commissioner Solheim, just to make sure I understand, were you suggesting essentially kind of a partial plan commission approval earlier on and then having it come back when more of it is,
you know, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be 2 plan commission meetings, but I was thinking purely in terms of the package of items that you submit for your land use application and some of those more detailed, even like lighting plans and stormwater plans that are included in that maybe those could be a delayed submittal.
Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Nicole. I just had a flashback to going to more than one meeting with you in your prior employment, and those meetings, you're right. I remember Julie came from the Community Development Division office, and I thought it was really good because often honestly, as an alder, sometimes planning staff doesn't really ever show up to neighborhood meetings. So this is when it's really important, not just because there might be people who don't understand it, although I think a skilled alder can just remind people that affordable housing is when you only pay 30% of your income on housing. So if you make more money, what's 30% of that? And I think that helps people's brain shift a little. But still, I think what you said is important. And when with the start off of the topic, with I haven't been on CDBG in so long, but of course they're part of this process. Would there ever be a way to have joint meetings with UDC, Plan Commission, and CDBG, like to do our affordable housing meeting, whatever timing fits to a project? That way, I mean, maybe you couldn't make all the decisions, but it might just be something, I know we've done that in the past on big issues where we've had joint meetings, but maybe this could be a more routinized way that we consolidate things. I had a couple more points. The thing that really worries me is like we have leveraged millions and millions of dollars from WIDA. That has been fabulous. I'm so proud of the city and our staff and all the developers that stepped up. But I just worry that WIDA is going to change the rules. And just even recently, I was speaking to Ted Mackham at Gorman, and he said, "Oh, next year they're wanting us to focus on rural housing." Now we all know we need affordable housing in every part of the state, and so does that mean like our great experience is going to be diminished? And how do we then keep up with this great, things that we've created over like 1,300 dwelling units that are affordable? Like, how do we keep that up if we're only if our major leverage is WIDA Section 42? And I don't know that anyone has an answer to that, but I just think to me, it's like a thing that's kind of like you assumed so much before COVID, and then COVID just turned everything upside down. So we're always assuming that we can like at least try and be competitive for these WIDA grants, and maybe who knows.
Okay.
And the final thing I wonder about is, while it's been a great opportunity, the range of affordability isn't as much as we need. We need a range of household incomes in these units. So if we can push it down more and make sure that we have money so that, you can get it at lower than 50% area median income and even less than that. Because, the people who make less than $15 an hour, those are the people we want to find housing for, not just the ones that are at 80% or 60% of median income, which, for example, I'm probably 60% of median income, and I don't make a lot of money, but I'm not, the most needy person either. So I don't know how we can solve that, because, we've got limited pots of money. And I guess my last kind of question, and maybe it's for later, and somebody mentioned it early on, and when we have bonus story options, should we tighten the rules? Like you can get a bonus story, under really tight criteria, not like, oh, it's pretty and it's nice. No, everything's in the eye of the beholder, but either it's like zero net carbon neutral, or it's affordable housing, or something really strong and powerful, things like that. So those are my thoughts, and thanks.
Thank you, Alder. I just want to agree with Commissioner Solheim. It is very helpful to have staff at meetings, and I know that staff came to many of the meetings in District 2 on the many developments that we had, including affordable housing and homeless shelter and all of that. And it is very helpful to have staff there to help answer questions. So thank you for making that comment, and thank you to staff for being there. Alder Heck.
Thank you. A couple of thoughts. I'm obviously all for all these things, and I like what Alder Rummel just had to say too. I'm curious why you limited the idea to only city-funded projects, because what if our fund ran out, yet the county still had some money and funded an affordable housing project in the city? So that's a thought that it might be a fantasy that were to happen. But and then my other thought was being careful to define affordable housing. I was thinking, is somebody who takes advantage of one of the WIDA financing projects that's not really a tax credit, it's not a Section 42 program, would they qualify? Somebody that has some 80% median income units because of a financing concern, would they qualify for this kind of a speed up? And then at the other end of the spectrum, would a permanent supportive housing project qualify for this kind of a speed up, where we need those types of developments definitely, but they could involve more consideration from neighborhoods and things than usual. So I'm thinking about making sure we defined exactly what would qualify for these sort of incentives, I'll call them.
Ms. Stouter?
Sure. I think those are really great questions, and want to stress that we don't have a clear recommendation on this topic, but really wanted to spark a discussion. I think the reason that we focused on city-funded affordable housing is because we were thinking, well, where do we have processes already that these projects are going through? A lot of scrutiny from staff and from CDBG and the council regarding the funding process, and also because of some of the comments that Commissioner Sundquist made at the beginning about location. I think that, if we limit it to city-funded affordable housing developments, then we know that we have some control over where those are location-wise. And so that is some of the thought that went into even just, putting this item out there. But I think, we certainly are open to looking at this in a variety of ways. And I do want to throw out there that at your next special meeting in late September, we'll be talking about transit-oriented development as one of the topics, and that maybe this is going to dovetail with that nicely. That's just sort of come to me during this meeting that those places might have a lot in common with what's been discussed here with this item.
Thank you, Ms. Stouter. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. I thought of some more things after Alder Huck spoke. So if we're taking a housing first approach to at least some of this housing, we've run into the problem where we haven't paid for enough supportive services. And so, we need to make sure that if we're doing this really intensive housing focused on the lowest and most needful populations, that we have the money for the services, or help make sure the developer does. And another thing I wonder about is environmental justice. One of the examples was put up was the one in my district on Fair Oaks, and as some of you probably remember, it's right next to Madison Kip Corporation, and there were at least some part of neighbors that thought it was a question of environmental justice putting it next to a factory that has chemicals dispersed in the air, and whether we weren't just making it so affordable housing meant you're next to a factory and not just anywhere. And that was driven a lot by land prices. I know that because it was industrial zoned and maybe cheaper price than other locations in the core of the city. And that kind of raises a final question and point that I want to make is, for example, Union Corners, that whole census tract is almost probably now not going to be eligible anymore. We've added enough variety of housing there that it sort of priced itself out of eligibility, which I think is what we kind of want, but it just shows the limits of the WIDA approach, so that, if a census tract's not eligible anymore, are we then ending up, as I think it was, at the edge, away from transit-oriented development, as Mr. Sundquist was saying. So, so sometimes I think the WIDA thing is kind of has a lot of strings that, at least we should be aware of. And that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I know that the city in the past has used a lot of TIF dollars to finance affordable housing, and I know recently we've approved several projects. Example, this last meeting on West Washington that didn't ask for any TIF dollars, but would have been, at least in my estimation, an area that we could have TIF'd, and that increment could have been used for affordable housing within I think a half a mile area, at least the TIF law allows. So does the city think about that? I know you have a TIF policy and only use it in certain conditions, but I think in opportunities like, for example, West Washington, we have where the gas station used to be, farther down the street in the 600 block, but in the 500 block, we just reviewed a multi-million-dollar project. I think that would provide at least increment that we could use for affordable housing within that area. And it could be affordable housing just to rehab some of the existing units on Mifflin and other areas within that area to encourage affordable housing. But I guess that's a question I have. I'm assuming the city does look at that.
Great points, good questions. Ms. Stouter? Or
I think it's a great set of questions that I don't think we have the right people in the virtual room to answer all of those questions just now. But I know it looks like Lynette has some answers. I see a hand.
Lynette.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to touch base on it because it's a conversation that we have a lot, especially through our affordable housing fund process, where we have an open RFP right now for developments that are coming in to get the WHEDA tax credits. It's a dance that we do with our TIF coordinator, because TIF is all about gap financing as well. So if you're coming in and asking the city's community development division for affordable housing funds, we also are looking to fund the gap. So if we come in and give a financing package, where we're funding their whole request, and then they go in to ask for TIF, they can't, kind of say that they have any type of, TIF gap. So it's something that I think every year we're looking at tweaking that process very closely, with the director and with our EDD unit. So I hear you. It's something that's definitely on our work plan to continue. And then the other thing that we are always trying to look at is, will that increment from an affordable housing deal really be kind of the price and the same as it would for a market rate deal as well, just because they are assessed a little bit different. So those are just, I wanted to say some points that we have to look at when we're looking at TIF and other city financing. But we are looking at how we combine those together just for more leverage to a deal as well.
I was looking more at the final year, the closeout of a TIF going then into our affordable housing fund, and some of these areas, why we aren't putting them in a TIF so that we have that year. So that's okay. I don't see any more hands raised. I haven't gotten as clear a sense on this. There's definitely, I sensed interest in doing something here, but I'm not quite sure that I got what. You, Ms. Stouter, did you get enough direction, or can you come back to us with some further ideas on this?
Yeah, I think that would be reasonable. I think we can continue to talk as staff and include Assistant Attorney Strange in those conversations. I think it was really helpful to hear some of the conversation earlier associated with incentivizing affordable housing, and really appreciate the input that you all provided here. So we'll not take this as a strong direction of any certain way to move forward, but we can bring back some more ideas at a future date.
I see that Alder Rummel has raised her hand again. Alder Rummel?
I have this crazy idea that probably all just say won't work, but so I have and I'm sure a lot of alders have developers that specialize in their neighborhood, and I have a couple, and they just don't do affordable housing. They provide good quality apartments, but that's not their skill set, and there's, as we know, a lot of work involved in being that kind of developer. Is there any way the city could look at a program where these market rate apartments, which most people can't afford at a certain income rate, could we help underwrite them for a 15-year or 30-year period where we could, have it for some, and we would pay the developer the difference and then let the tenant pay a reduced rate or some kind of program so it's not just a special developer with skills, but all kinds of developers could then maybe offer something in their units, and some have, management companies that maybe could, operate these things, not just have the city do it. But that's one thing I thought about a lot.
Thank you, Alder. Ms. Stouter, it looks like you have something you want to say about that.
Sure. I think that is an idea. I would defer to Jim O'Keefe or Lynette Rhodes on this, but I believe that the cost per unit is much greater with that kind of scenario than it is when the city is one of many parties subsidizing affordable housing. And so that what we do with the Affordable Housing Fund is we come to the table with city subsidy that then is paired with WIDA tax credits. And we end up paying about $20,000, $25,000 per unit to subsidize those for 30 years. I think that your idea is not a bad one, certainly, but my understanding is that it's much more expensive. Jim, it looks like Jim may have some more to share on that.
Mr. O'Keefe.
Nope, not a bad idea, not a new idea either. It is something that we have looked at as an alternative to subsidizing tax credit developments. And I cannot say that we've gotten very deep in discussions with any particular development, but as Heather mentioned, it became pretty apparent in the little bit of discussions that we did have that it is likely a more expensive proposition than the path that we've taken with the WIDA tax credits. But I think we're interested in it because I think it provides a quicker way to get affordable housing added than doing our 3 or 4 or 5 tax credit projects a year. So we're very open to it, and perhaps in combination with other incentives, that's still something that we'd be able to pursue.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. Okay, I don't see any more raised hands, so I'm going to take us to the last item on our agenda, demolition, and that is Kevin Furco again, and it looks like probably John Strange. Mr. Furco. I have unmuted you from this end, Kevin. So are you having a problem with your speaker?
Okay, sorry. I was very eloquent and very profound, so I'm probably not going to be able to recreate that magic, but I'll do my best and start over. Sorry about that. Our last item tonight is the demolition ordinance. We've got about 20 minutes left in the schedule, so I'm just going to do a very brief overview here. And as the chair mentioned, John and I are here to answer questions, but also the rest of staff as well. Just to set the table a little bit for this item, we talked earlier in the agenda about some changes to the threshold, making some uses that are conditional permitted, and changing those thresholds. We really see a companion to that piece is then looking at the demolition ordinance. And are there certain types of demolition projects that might be able to be moved to a different, more administrative function? We don't have a specific proposal tonight. We think it's too premature for that. This is a very big policy discussion. But we really wanted to, get some thoughts, start the discussion here tonight and see kind of what the commission's initial thoughts are. I recognize that this is a very, very heavy discussion. The City of Madison's demolition process for decades has included two parts. I'm going to say one is dealing with the demolition of itself, and the second part is looking at the proposed future use, which is a very unique component. The research and some of the other ordinances we've had, many cities have some sort of demolition process. But as far as that aspect of looking and focusing on the actual approved use, we believe that's fairly unique to Madison at this point. So what we want to do is look at a few items. First, want to take a look at a couple options as far as things that we could look at in terms of possible changes. First, there's different considerations here. Is the process different based on the whether use is permitted or not? John is here, and I know there are some legal concerns about denying a demolition use and denying what is otherwise a permitted use, and I'll let John speak to that or answer questions on that. But we're looking at potential changes to the demolition ordinance. Also looking at the structure's historic value. The Landmarks Commission plays a very critical role in our process, and they advise the Plan Commission on the historic value. Is there room to change the process depending on structures that don't have known historic value? Also, the size and scope of a demolition request. Is it different, for example, if you're dealing with one demo or if you're dealing with an entire block? So the size and scope, we think, is a consideration that we'd like to get your feedback on. Public notification. One of the benefits of our process right now is it's transparent. There's different notifications that go along with it. So how do we maintain that level of information? And then also just what are options for alternative processes? What kind of questions do you have about that? Certainly the city has many different administrative processes. We have minor alt, we have other processes. We've looked at other communities in terms of some of the processes that they have and we can speak to. But again, just see what the Commission's initial thoughts and questions might be on that. Finally, in your packet, there is just a couple of examples. We don't need to go through those. Those are very simplified, very hypothetical examples of just showing, some more simple demolition projects and wondering if there are elements of those that the Plan Commission might allow for a more administrative process. So I will leave it there, and then happy to answer questions and any follow-ups that you may have.
Attorney Strange, did you have something that you would like to add?
Well, I'll just touch a little bit on the some of the legal implications of the demolition ordinance and answer any questions that you have on that. Like Kevin said, I did look at I've looked at quite a few different cities trying to find in particular, well, two things, trying to find cities where they have the demolition approval process in the zoning code. That's kind of one issue. And then the second issue is finding a demolition ordinance that takes the proposed future use into consideration. And what I'm finding, and it's certainly not an exhaustive search thus far, is that the vast majority, in fact, all that I've looked at so far, have their demolition ordinances outside of the zoning code. Actually primarily in the building inspection code. The second thing I'm finding is that none of the ones that I've found so far use a proposed future use as a possibility for denying a demolition permit. And one of the specific legal concern that I have, and it's come up some, and is the possibility of denying a demolition where the future use is already been declared a permitted use in our zoning code. And the reason that's a legal concern for me is because in Wisconsin, a permitted use is a use by right, which the Wisconsin Supreme Court has said is a constitutional right. It's a constitutional property right. And so where we have this sort of catch-all demolition ordinance that potentially is going to sneak out and deny an otherwise permitted use, you're going to run into legal questions virtually every time that happens. And I think within the context of this entire discussion tonight, where we look at the possibility of removing some of those barriers that are excluding low-income folks from living in certain parts of the city, by making those certain uses permitted, quite honestly, if you don't also do something about this demolition ordinance, then those changes don't have much impact. You're still setting up what is essentially a conditional use process at the end, or for a permitted use. And I think logically we can all step back and say that just doesn't make sense. If we're going to say something's a permitted use in the zoning code, then it ought to be a permitted use. And we shouldn't necessarily have a catch-all demolition ordinance that allows us to kind of on an ad hoc basis deny that permitted use. Now, some of the, I know we're running out of time, so just one more thing. Some of the ordinances that I've looked at that are not in the zoning code, however, I think scratch a lot of the itches that we have with respect to demolitions. So they do things like employ delayed demolitions for residential homes that delay the process so that people can look at the possibility of moving the home and saving it. Or some have restrictions that say that if the residence was built before a certain date, then it needs to be essentially recycled because there's a lot of copper in it, or there's a lot of other things. So there are things. And then, for example, in Denver, every every demolition has to at least be run by the preservation planner to make sure that that particular structure does not have some historic value that's worth landmark. So there are some things that can be done, I think, to address some of the current concerns that I think that we feel like we have with the demolition ordinance. But really, I think looking at this concept of moving things to permitted uses to try and allow for more affordable housing, but then sort of taking the ultimate step and saying, if we're going to do that, if we're going to call something in permitted use, then let's also, we have to remove this process whereby we can step in and say, yeah, it's permitted, but not this one. And so that's about it.
Okay, thank you, John. Are there questions of either Attorney Strange or Mr. Furco? Comments, thoughts? Alder Rummel.
Thank you. I agree that if we're going to go through this process of making things more by right, we have to deal with this. It raises so many questions for me. So you're right, it's a bigger policy conversation. We just seen it twice and we acted on it right away this last time. But if it's a permitted use, but the new adopted plan talks about a different use, that's, I think, a real contradiction. And we just fixed that with the Oscar Mayer thing, where right away, somebody made a motion to change the zoning for that park area that was industrial to park, so that it would, not that, we think anything's going to happen, but we saw what happened with Amazon, right, where they had a right to do what they wanted to do, and that was just basically the end of the story. So I think we need to be mindful about what our adopted plans say, and then change what's the zoning to reflect what we want to do, even if that makes somebody non-conforming for some period of time. I mean, if that's what we think the future is going to be, then let's change it. The question with the minor alteration, oh, please no, as Alder, I don't want to have the power to decide the future of a building. That would be horrible. Because I would then say to them, you got to prove to me that this building is so beyond repair that its only future is demolition. But see, we don't make that the standard. The standard is, sometimes we've, like Mifflin's a good example. We just approved what I would call clear cutting of historic fabric. We said that's okay because we went through a really long process and discussed it, and various bodies approved. And whether I agree or not, at least it's consistent, and we did what we said we're going to do. So, and that's the other thing that really disturbs me is some things are we've designated as historic district, and within that there are things where you go, well, that's not contributing, or that is. So there's that whole subset of conversations. But there are other areas that could be a historic district, but they're not yet. And so you don't even apply the same standards, it could be the same historic fabric 4 blocks away, but it's not in a district. And it doesn't then have any protection. And I know I don't ever ask questions, so no one ever says, what a good question, Alder, but I have a lot of thoughts about this because I deal with it a lot. If serving on landmarks I realized it was 8 years, we sort of come to understand that not just the embedded history in a building, but the embedded resources of old wood, copper, somebody mentioned, craftsmanship that will never be replaced. Plus, it tends to be more affordable, some of this housing. So I think we have all this stuff comes together, and the simple question of, should we allow this to be demolished and build something new, that I think we really need to talk about more, and at least discuss, the equity questions. Is this an area where we said, yes, this is where we're going to have more infill and we're going to give up this older housing stock, or here's an area that has kind of neat old stuff that we want to save, and then give the message that we're going to save it and help property owners improve it and make it safe to live in and have life for another generation. So thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Alder Rummel said very well many of the things I was thinking. I'll go back to the historic preservation plan and the unrealized portions of the historic preservation plan. Those will not having everything implemented in the historic preservation plan, which is in fact kind of meant to be a living document, means we're always going to be behind in how we're saving important structures. And it's not just age, although I appreciate what Attorney Strange said about, I think you said Denver had something about it had to be so many years old to get a certain treatment. But we're finding from our underrepresented communities survey of historic resources that there can be things that are maybe only 25 years old that are very historic and important to save. So I struggle a little bit with this. I do think there might be room with landmarks. I mean, I don't know about the evolution of the demolition recommendations or whatever they're referred to by landmarks when they make their categorization of whether something has no historic value. It's cool is another one, but they can't justify saving it. And then the other is that it's a landmark, essentially. So if that first category were determined by landmarks and we had some pretty good faith in what those levels of finding really are, I could see that being a final decision on the demolition potentially as a way to speed things up. But if in those other two categories, or if they're revised or something, I would be a little skeptical of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Sundquist.
Yeah, just a quick request and not something for a response in real time. I've personally been on Zoom calls for about 12 hours today, so starting to run out of gas. But when I first got on the Plan Commission for the first time, there was a committee that looked at demolition permits. It was run by Jim Bull from MG&E, who was a Plan Commissioner at the time. And I've looked to see if I could find the report or whatever documentation came out of that about what we were trying to accomplish with the setup that we have now, because I couldn't really. I've tried to explain it before and I've done it wrong. It would be helpful just for me to put this in context if staff had that and could circulate what it was we were going for back in the day, and if we're gonna lurch from one extreme to another, or just what. So just a request.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that could be helpful too. Mr. Tucker, you have something to add?
Yeah, we have that. I served on that. We can bring it around. We're fixing things, basically trying to fix things. Ended up basically in a very similar place at the end of that 2-year process that you guys participated in. But we can try and find that information for you.
Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I do think if we're going to be making some of these smaller apartment buildings as permitted uses, that we do have to change the demolition standards so that they're not conditional uses. And maybe there's criteria that if it's in a landmark district, then the Landmarks Commission evaluates it, and if it rises to a level that they feel is appropriate, that it's evaluated by the Plan Commission. Multiple properties, if they're looking at demolishing 4 or 5 contiguous properties, then that may be at a level that, again, the Plan Commission should evaluate it. I think I guess I would be looking at staff to come up with some maybe criteria where they feel it would be appropriate. And I know that this is kind of unusual because the city that I worked at, demolitions were never a conditional use. It was really evaluated in the building department, and it was a they had to meet certain criteria of removal, but it was not at a level that the Plan Commission would evaluate. The Historic Commission or Landmarks Commission would evaluate it if it was in a historic district, but their evaluation was really advisory, and it could delay the process, but it could not really remove the ultimate demolition. But it would allow at least time so that if they wanted to relocate a structure, that would be possible. But I would be looking at staff to come up with some potential criteria that we could evaluate.
I would just comment that I tend to agree with, I think, what Alder Rummel said. I mean, if it's in a historic district, I would not be able to support any lesser evaluation and criteria for historic districts. I mean, it's like 1.5% of our city. And so I think that would not be appropriate. The thing that Alder Heck said in regard to if Landmarks finds it to have no historic value, I could see some potential there. But I do think back to on the Woman's Building and some of the things that are in our new preservation plan about underrepresented. And I think we've got to be careful here on some things. So I would want to see something that was pretty cognizant of those kind of issues. Commissioner Hagenow.
Yeah, I don't. I'm just going to second kind of what you just said, Chair Zellers, and what Commissioner Cantrell had said. Kind of what everybody's saying here. We definitely need to do something. I think if we're allowing some of these new buildings to just be by right, if we're going to go in that direction, it definitely makes sense to not have to be looking at every single house or building that needs to get torn down to get our approval before that by right development can take place. So, I can't say exactly what that looks like. I hope staff can put something together based on the comments here. I'm sure that we can figure something out. So,
thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so it is now 8:02. Ms. Stouter, do you have enough direction on this last one to put something together that we can look at?
I do. I think that, one thing that I would just say as a quick response is that I don't think we're looking to change the way that things work in historic districts, except, maybe just relying more on the Landmarks Commission as a final ruling. Rather than having another step for Plan Commission. But I think outside of the historic districts, which is 98% of the city, I think we can look at some different steps. And one would be, if Landmarks determines that it's not historically an important building, maybe that goes through in a very straightforward manner without Plan Commission review at all. And maybe there are some different sort of categories of the landmarks review that we can make clearer. But then I do think that one thing we'll really need to focus on is removing that, trying to look at all of those standards related to the proposed future use and make sure that we're on good legal ground with regard to permitted uses. So even if the Plan Commission is reviewing the demolition of a building, if it's for a permitted use, that review of the demolition needs to be about the demolition and not about the proposed future permitted use, if that makes sense. So I think we can put together some ideas for the commission to react to at a future date.
And that comment goes to really what Alder Rummel was saying, that we need to make sure that we are zoning things appropriately given our intended future use and plans for those areas. Otherwise, we end up with the potential of something being that we would like to see as housing, and it's still zoned industrial or whatever it might be. So I think that we really need to make sure that we get the zoning right so that we get the use right for what we're aiming for. One final comment, Mr. Tucker? Oh, your hand was up. Okay, I just lowered it. Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? I don't see any hands. I just want to say thank you all very much. We packed an awful lot into this, and staff's going to need to, take off on some of these things and get them back to us. So thank you, staff, for doing the work that you did, and thank you, commissioners, for focusing on this. Alder Rummel.
You may have already done it, but please make sure this PowerPoint is part of the legislative history.
It is. It's been up there for a while, actually. But
then
yeah.
I missed it. That's on me. Thanks.
Yeah, that's okay. Alder Heck.
Sorry, I was looking for I think Mr. Furco said there were some demolition examples, and I couldn't find those. Is that what you were saying?
I think he was saying on the last page, page 3 of the staff report, there is a thing about a single family home that's proposed for demolition.
Oh, okay. I was looking for photos or something.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
My apologies. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Furco, did you want to add anything? No? Okay.
No, you answered the question I was going to say. They were just hypothetical examples if the discussion needed a little prompting, which it obviously did. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then I am looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Commissioner Cantrell, seconded by Commissioner Hagenhout. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Take care.